Hey everyone, Hellraiser here. Just before the video begins, I'd like to remind you all that if you are not enjoying a particular story, or if you've heard this story before and would like to skip it, there are clickable timestamps that will take you to the start of each story in the description of this video. And now, on with the video. 1. This incident took place when I was in 8th standard. I used to go for Hindi tuitions, which were about 15 minutes walking distance away from my house. I was 12 years old and I had this thought that I was old enough to travel alone. I know I was just 12, but come on. It was just 15 minutes and I had a phone, so I could contact my parents in case of an emergency. However, it took time convincing my parents that I would be alright on my own. Initially, they resisted, so my mom hired a maid to drop and pick me up from classes. I believed myself to be an independent person and decided to fire the maid myself, politely, after a few months of irregularity, as I used to get late for classes. My parents were shocked but cool with it after some convincing. It was one such day after I began traveling alone. I was on time and was waiting for the lift at the ground floor. Had to go up to the 8th floor. On entering the lift, I was just about to close the door when I saw a man in his 20s waving at a distance. He was waving at me to stop the lift as he wanted to get in and was a little distance away. At first I decided to ignore, but then I realized what harm would it do letting him share the lift. Plus I had my phone. He soon got in, thanked me, and tried striking a conversation. I knew I shouldn't, but I encouraged it. He asked me where I was going and all. Also, it was just 8 floors, but the lift was super slow. It was an old building. The man looked in pain. At about the 2nd floor, he asked me whether there was a doctor in the building, but I didn't know. He started hissing in pain and brought down his pants and underwear, exposing his penis. That was the first time I ever saw a penis. He started muttering to himself that it was paining a lot, Dard ho ra hai in Hindi, and started rubbing it. I was struck for a few seconds. I couldn't get out as it was a moving lift and I was scared to abruptly stop the lift. I kind of panicked inside, didn't know what to do, so stayed calm on the outside, staring at my nails. After what felt like an eternity, he got off at the 6th floor. I was so relieved. I haven't told this to anybody. I tried telling a friend, but couldn't. I feared traveling in that lift again, but had no choice. I know most of you are thinking it's just a normal encounter and nothing happened to me. But guys, I was just 12. Born and brought up in a protected society where talking about such things is a taboo. It was a sudden shock to me. Anyway, I am thankful that it lasted just a few seconds, but I was so terrified and embarrassed at that moment. The poor guy probably didn't care that I was in the lift, considering his pain in the penis. 2. Please be aware the following story contains themes of sexual assault. I'm female, 25 years old now. Last year I had just moved into a new neighborhood, almost an hour away from where I used to live. The house my boyfriend, Andrew, and I were renting was in the middle of a cul-de-sac, facing the road. It's a beautiful, quiet area with gorgeous mountains and trails just a few blocks away. I loved it there. Before. The area I lived in before was significantly more urban. I lived alone in a loft pretty much in the middle of downtown. Of course, it was great because everything was within walking distance and I could take the train to work and visit great little local coffee shops or restaurants. Just your typical city living. I enjoyed it, but was very happy to move for several reasons. I was paying just a little less than I do now for very little space. And I was craving the quiet of a more suburban setting. but a greater reason for relief was because I'd had several horrible, more than creepy encounters. I had never been a paranoid person. I was naive and never thought I'd have a reason to worry. The area was well lit and I saw police pretty consistently. But then it all started. One night I was particularly unnerved. I was walking my dog like I always did. But I felt fear suddenly, like when you're alone in the dark, in your house, and you run to your room for no good reason but the simple feeling of fear. So I took a shortcut through some building. It was stupid. It was a short but dark little alleyway full of trash bins and back doors. But it would get me home at least 5 minutes faster. I have a Labrador Retriever and, as we all know, in general all dogs are very aware of their surroundings and can pick up on everything. Halfway down the alleyway she kept slowing down and looking back. I started to get really scared. I had to yank at her harness and whisper, "Let's go," several times. I've never seen her be aggressive with strangers or even weird sounds, but she was quietly growling and I could see the hair on her back standing. When I was reaching the end of the alleyway, I looked back and saw a man in the shadows with what seemed like a rope wrapped around his hand. After I turned the corner, I ran. When I made it inside my apartment, I turned off all the lights and looked out the window. I was on the top floor of a 2-story building. I saw the same man walk up to the doors, but I lost sight of him once he was up the steps. He buzzed my apartment. I stood there for a while thinking it'd be best to not try to speak to him. He yelled out, "I found your wallet, you dropped it. Can I come in and give it to you?" I thought to myself, is this guy for fucking real? I never carried a purse or wallet when I went out to walk my dog. Always put my ID and a credit card in the zipper pocket of my workout jacket, since I jogged throughout our walks. I said nothing. This piece of shit was probably going to try to rob me. I saw him leave, but was never able to get a look at his face. A few days later, I was on the train coming back from a late shift at work. I take the last train of the night. It was 11 p.m., and 2 stops before mine, a man came inside and sat right beside me, which was strange, seeing as there were literally at least 24 open seats. But he seemed distracted by his phone, so I thought nothing more of it. When I got home, however, I panicked. I was putting my hair back to wash my face before bed, when I felt a sudden thick chunk of my long hair was missing from the middle. Someone had made a blunt cut straight across, about 5 inches up. That morning I simply brushed my hair and kept it down, so I hadn't had a chance to notice anything. I called Andrew and asked if he'd done it as a prank, even though I knew I was asking in vain. It had to have been the man on the train, and I wish I'd gotten a better look at him again. The feeling of being watched persisted for weeks. I'd hear footsteps behind me, get my door buzzed in the middle of the night, etc., etc. So I stopped walking at night, and eventually altogether. Instead, I'd drive down to a park a few miles out. But things only got worse. One night I found a package outside my door. Inside was a letter labeled, "All for you." I opened it happily, thinking it was a gift from Andrew. I was dead wrong. It was a used condom. I instantly called the police. They told me it was most likely a prank, and there was nothing they could do. I felt helpless. The nerves got out of hand. I was nervous all the time. Andrew worried too, so he never left me alone. He stopped sleeping at his place even though he continued to pay his rent. So the second my lease ended, I bailed. He ended his lease and we moved in together. So now, fast forward about a month and a half, give or take. We have a yard now, so I only take my dog on walks when I'm off work, and it's morning or afternoon. I go to the trails in the mountains, usually with Andrew, but if not, I travel with my phone fully charged. The trails are right by the neighborhood, so I get a signal, although sometimes weak. I had bought pepper spray that I carried clipped to my backpack. I had started to feel safe again, and chalked up everything that had happened to just some crazy dipshit in the neighborhood. Again, I was dead wrong. It was a Saturday afternoon. It had been raining all night, but the afternoon was just a little overcast. I love the smell of rain, so I hit the trails alone with my dog. We were about an hour in, and I heard someone approaching us across a bend. This was a hot spot for rock climbers, so I was used to coming across them, or runners and other people walking their dog. My dog was a few yards past me, but she always stayed relatively close. She started running toward me, which she always did playfully or when she wanted some water. I smiled and called to her, reaching out to pet her when she reached me. I kneeled down, but she ran past me. I turned around to make sure she wasn't going to bother anyone. She's still young and has a bad habit of jumping on strangers and violently licking them. She was standing in front of a tall man wearing the kind of clothes you wouldn't expect someone to wear while hiking. Jeans and a dark long-sleeve shirt. White male around 6'2", incredibly average looking. Only his height stood out to me. Instantly I felt strange. My dog was just looking up at him, standing straight. He looked at me as I approached him. "Sorry," I said for no reason, and pulled her toward me. I smiled at him and turned away. "Have a good one," I said as we walked away. I was having a hard time getting my dog to turn and keep walking. "Didn't you take my gift, you cunt?" I froze. I felt the cold shiver of terror crawl up my entire body. I thought, I can run up toward the mountain. Dumb, it goes on for miles and miles. Or I could try to get past him and run home. Also dumb, I'm 5'7" and 125 pounds. And I've never fought anyone in my life. Before I could decide, he was approaching me. I let go of my dog, who was now standing still again and growling. I turned to him and reached behind me for my pepper spray. As I unclipped it, he lunged at me. I fell to the ground, hard, with my arm still behind me. I felt it bend at the shoulder a way it wouldn't. With a forearm pressed across my chest, and his right hand over my mouth holding my chin closed tight was his thumb. I squirmed and pushed to get myself free, but he was too heavy. My dog was running around us, barking, and crying in a high-pitched tone I'd never heard before. I started praying someone would hear us. I saw her bite his back and nip at his head, but he didn't even flinch. She ran up and down the trail, barking louder than before. She was so confused. It's amazing how fear like this turns your entire body to survival mode. When you manage to get past the panic. I felt paralyzed. For several moments I thought the weight of him on top of me would break my ribs. I couldn't breathe. After the initial shock, I realized my left arm was free. I felt a stinging pain in my right shoulder. It's broken, I kept thinking to myself. He was kissing my face and smelling my hair and saying things under his breath I couldn't understand. I could feel his penis pressing against my leg. "Be a good girl for me, okay, baby? Okay." I tried to calm down. I begged myself to just calm down and think. I stopped fighting. I patted around for a rock with my left hand. He softened his grip on my chest and moved his hand from my mouth, so I started moving my arm, hoping he wouldn't notice it was free. "You want it so bad, don't you, baby?" He reached down to my shorts, sliding his hand up my leg and grabbing my hip tight. He buried his head into my neck, licking me and groaning. This was my shot. I grabbed a rock about the size of my palm. Not very large, but it felt sharp, and I needed to act quickly. I hit the rock against the back of his head, simultaneously rolling as he slid to my side. I rolled on my injured shoulder and crawled on the dirt and rocks as fast as possible. He screamed and pressed his hands on the back of his head. I ran faster than I knew I could. I didn't look back. I could hear my dog still barking, and I heard another scream. As I ran, I could hear my dog catching up to me. I was afraid to slow down, to reach into my backpack for my phone. So I just ran, and didn't stop. It took me what seemed like an eternity to run back to the start of the trail. My dog was with me. When I looked down, I saw blood on her nose, mouth, and neck. I feared she was injured. When I approached my parked car, I saw a man getting out of his. "Please call the police," I screamed at him. "Please." He looked terrified and reached into his pocket. When he looked down at my dog, he fell silent for a moment and looked at me. I grabbed her neck to check for wounds. She was perfectly fine. When the police got there, they found him about 2 miles in, sitting in blood. My dog had torn into his calf, most likely preventing him from running after me. He was arrested and charged. They found his car near my home. He'd been stalking me that whole time. He's now serving a 16-month sentence. 16 months. It wasn't rape. He had no priors. His little gift hadn't been taken into evidence, so they couldn't prove the stalking. In the end, I felt thankful for my dog and just pure lucky I was able to act to fight for my life. No one should ever go through something like this. We know there are sick people out there, but we never think we will be unlucky enough to come across one. For months I couldn't sleep. I had torn tissue around my shoulders, so work was hard. I hated being alone, but didn't know how to behave around people. I was only ever content when I could just cuddle up with my dog and sleep or watch reruns of my favorite shows, movies. Slowly, though, things got better and I changed my perspective. I felt proud of myself for fighting instead of beating myself up about what I could have done to prevent this, or what I'd done to deserve it. I reminded myself how lucky I was that I hadn't been raped. I sleep better now and have started running again. After surgery and a bit of rehab, my shoulder is doing better. Fear only creeps back in when I think about what will happen when he is released. I like to imagine he'll let go of whatever fixation he had, but part of me knows better. I'm in the process of moving from the home I loved so dearly. I've decided to get my master's in English. I always thought I'd stop with my bachelor's, so I'm moving to a different state for school. Andrew found a job and is coming with me. He helped me through everything and was understanding the entire time. I'm moving forward with my life, not running away. The best thing we can do for ourselves when someone comes into our lives and takes something away from us, whether it's our sense of security, our happiness, any piece of us, is to fight. And never let them break your spirit or your soul. Never let anyone or anything define you. Fight with all you have. Thanks for reading. 3. When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this was the one that stood out. In the late 1960s, John was traveling by train from his village to another to visit family. He had to change trains at one point, and was dropped off at what amounted to a platform and a hut in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else at the station, and other than a dirt road that led off into the surrounding woods, there was nothing there. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker, and just about the time he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat, an old woman appeared out of the twilight. She asked if he was waiting for such and such a train, and when he said he was, she said it wouldn't be long until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night, and offered him a meal and room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from the station. Lodging with locals was more or less the standard when traveling in this part of the USSR. and Great Uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform. So he was glad to accept her offer. He took his suitcase, and they set off together down the dark road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2. And by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story house, John was tired and hungry. They went inside, and the woman lit some oil lamps and warmed some borscht for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realize that the old woman was actually a man. Not wanting to pry, and too tired to care, John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping. She led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, they said goodnight, and she closed the door. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called to her, but she didn't answer, and he heard nothing else. Figuring he would deal with it in the morning, and that she had probably done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down and lay it on the bed, deciding to make the best of it and get some sleep. Before he could fall asleep, though, he felt the urge to pee and got out of bed, hoping to find a chamber pot or something he could pee in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that's where the pot would be if there was one. Instead, he found a body. "Nope," Great Uncle John said, and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way. It was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was probably a dead man. But if he broke the window and tried to get out that way, there was a good chance that the old woman, and who knows who else was there, would hear him and come into the room before he could get away. He did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body out from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress and covered it with the blanket. Then he got under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs, and then toward the room. The lock clicked, and the knob turned slowly. In the gloom, John saw someone move toward the bed. Then he heard several terrific and sickening thuds. The person had bashed the body on the bed with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor right in front of John. There was silence. Then the person went out of the room, and the door was shut again. The footsteps went down the stairs, and then there was silence again. John moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar, and was able to slowly pry the window open. He didn't say, but I imagine he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out, then dove through himself, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind. He landed without too much injury, and began to run into a field behind the house towards some lights in the far distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it, and John was able to get a ride to another village where he could catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what had happened to the authorities, since at that time in the USSR there was a distinct chance he would have been the one who got into trouble. He just thanked God he escaped, and decided the next time he traveled to visit relatives, he would take another way. 4. I don't believe in the law of attraction as a general rule. I've tried manifesting things such as money, job opportunities, and a relationship with a guy who looks like he's fresh off the pages of any fashion magazine, and gotten bupkis. So there's the proof that it doesn't work, or at least not for anything positive. I blame it on my love of horror films and stalker stories. It's the only explanation of the shit that happened. About a week before Thanksgiving 2013, a friend of mine asked me to house sit for her and her husband, and keep her cat company since they decided to visit family in Oklahoma at the last minute. I really didn't want to. You know that feeling you get down in your gut when something isn't quite right, but you don't know why? I don't know if it's fight or flight, survival instincts, or spontaneous clairvoyance, but I've ended up paying a price when I decided to dismiss that sudden twinge in my stomach and random shakiness as nerves and silliness. I'm overly analytical and have to find reason in everything. I have common sense, but I just ignore it. It's a flaw, I know. My friend was practically begging me to help her out, so I reluctantly said yes. The house was cool, and I had a chance to get away from my roommates for a few days. Despite the screamingly bad feeling I had, I was looking forward to it. Things were okay at first. Her cat and my cat were getting along. I was getting along with their bar stash, and the bed in the guest room was a welcome change from the boulder I was sleeping on. Most importantly, I had peace, quiet, and full use of her car. Life was good. I had to work that Monday and Tuesday, but since things were quite slow, I stayed up super late, watching scary movies and half-assing it when I went to the office. Tuesday night, the cats and I celebrated my having the rest of the week off by making alcoholic milkshakes. For just me. And watching Saw in the Dark for the millionth time when I heard a man's voice near the door. I figured it was just people walking by. The house is close to the sidewalk, and didn't think anything of it. But when I heard it again near the living room window behind me, I got a little spooked and turned the volume down. After a minute or so, I pulled the curtains back and saw a shirtless man walking across my friend's yard. He was walking toward the house across the street, and it was too dark to make out any features. I let it go. We'd had a bit of a cold snap, and I think it was in the 40s that night. That's a little too nippy for walking around half naked, and the whole thing seemed completely wrong, so my twinge was alerting extra hard. Plus, I was creeped out by what had just occurred in the movie. So I called it a night and went to bed. I reasoned that, since this city is crazy, I've passed by and exchanged pleasantries with people who were as naked as the day God made them in broad daylight. This was nothing to fret about. I double-checked the locks on the doors and the windows to be sure, though. Wednesday was pretty normal for the most part. I hit the gym, went to Starbucks, and FaceTimed with my friend, listening to her complain about her relatives and how much her hometown sucks, and later ran errands. YOLO'd a little more on the bar stash, and indulged in a good Netflix binge. It was a good day, and in hindsight, I think I was just being set up for what was going to happen later in the day. Kind of like the calm before the storm, the other shoe dropping, paying for having such a nice day, etc. Wednesday night, I was in my usual spot in the living room, watching some cheesy horror movie on Netflix, when I kept hearing tapping and scraping sounds on all the windows. I just ignored it first, since it was intermittent, and it was kind of windy outside, but soon ditched that idea as I realized it rhythmic and deliberate. The person doing it was deliberately going from window to window on the first floor, and with the living room and kitchen being set up in a sort of horseshoe design, I felt like I was being hunted. It sounded like metal on glass, so I figured whomever was doing this had a knife that they were using to knock on the windows and making it slide across the glass. Tap, 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 scrape, tap, 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 scrape, and so on and so forth. There may have been a chuckle or two as the guy slowly walked back and forth between the windows. I don't think I've ever heard anything as menacing as this asshole's laugh. He was clearly enjoying what he was doing. Whenever I read short stories about stalking or general creepiness, I've always pictured myself in the OP's shoes as I read this story, thinking about what I would do or how I would respond if it were me. I've mostly been a huge chicken in these visualizations, but this time it really was me. And I was mostly a huge chicken. I'm nothing if not consistent, I guess. Oddly enough, I wasn't outwardly scared. I forced myself to at least appear to be calm. I figured that the guy could see me because he focused on the set of windows directly behind me and scraped extra slowly right behind my head. I was not going to let him know that I was afraid, even though I was on the verge of spontaneously watering the couch. I continued to sit on the couch cross-legged, frozen. I felt my heartbeat speed up. I noticed the sudden dryness in my mouth, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my phone was upstairs, so there was no calling for help. In my panic, I expected him to burst in any second if he saw me moving. Despite this, even though I was shaking violently on the inside, I refused to let this guy know that I was afraid. To borrow a phrase from a college friend, I figured that if I was going to get got, I wasn't going to be a pussy about my situation. If I could get a piece of this dude's ass as he hurt me, then I was going to do it. Coherent thought fled. But a simple phrase of "fuck him" repeated itself in my mind. My brain was practically scream-chanting this to me as I tried to figure out what I was going to do. The guy knew that I knew what was up, because he pressed himself against the window directly behind me and began hurling profanities, and talked about what he had planned in massive detail. He said it was my time and thanked me for wearing tights and no pants. It took me a minute to realize he actually meant leggings. He said that I had asked for this by going outside while wearing tights. He asked if I was wearing tights right then. I was, because I live in them. He said that I was going to have his baby after he got inside. Part of me wishes that I hadn't turned the volume down on the movie, because I could hear every disgusting thing he said, and most of it was too vile to repeat here. Time just seemed to stand still, and I don't think I've ever experienced as much silence as I did that night. Even the cats were frozen in fear, looking at me wide-eyed but not making a sound. No offense to them, but I suddenly found myself wishing that I'd adopted a pit bull at that exact moment, because they were absolutely useless. I've heard about cats who have defended their owners from intruders, but my cat and her cat were happy to just stay crouched down on the floor and wait for me to handle the situation. Then he talked about how he'd done this before. He'd followed a woman and tried to grab her, but she fought him off and got away. He laughed about this too, and said he'd wanted to get her pregnant. It was at this point that I slid off the couch and onto the floor, mostly because I didn't want him to see me, but also because my legs were asleep from holding that awful position so long. I crawled to the kitchen, pulled myself up, and got the biggest knife I could find. I also grabbed her toaster. Don't ask me why I chose that as a weapon, because I don't know. Something inside me had snapped. I don't know if it was his verbal abuse, the shenanigans with the windows, the fact that he talked about watching me and described what I'd been wearing, or his entitled attitude that told him he could do whatever sexual shit he wanted to me because I was alone. But I was beyond pissed. I'm pretty sure that every law enforcement professional will say that what I did next was nuts. But I was a little nuts with anger and fear, so it follows. I walked back to the window, and the guy was still talking shit and laughing about it. He hadn't realized that I'd walked away. I put the knife and toaster on the couch, took a deep breath and another, and then ripped those fucking curtains open as angrily as possible. It caught the douche off guard because he peeled himself from the window and backed up so hard that he stumbled and dropped his weapon, a wrench. He was completely naked. He started grinning with satisfaction as soon as he saw me, began rubbing himself saying, "Let me in, bitch." It was my turn to press myself up against the window, which I did with a deranged Jack Nicholson in The Shining type of smile. He kept rubbing himself and telling me to make it easy and let him in, but I just kept smiling and slowly held up the knife. I calmly and slowly mouthed several words. "I'm going to kill you," while staring directly into his eyes and maintaining the crazy smile. I kept thinking that I was insane for taunting him, that he was going to find a way to get inside and do God knows what to me. But it was all I had. A quick side note. I developed this smile in college, when dudes would get aggressive in clubs and bars or would try to talk to me on the street when I really didn't feel like talking. I've expanded its use to people who just won't take no for an answer. I stand rock still, open my eyes as widely as possible, and give them the craziest smile without saying a word. It usually works. And miraculously, my crazy tactic worked. Okay, it may not have worked. I'm not sure if it did the trick on its own so much as that someone with extremely bright lights drove by the house at that exact moment. They apparently drove by a little too slowly for the guy's liking, because he got spooked by it and disappeared. I just stood there not breathing for what felt like an hour, until I came back to myself. I couldn't actually process what had just occurred. To be honest, I'm still in disbelief that it happened. I didn't call the police for a couple of reasons. I had a bad experience with campus police during my college years. A guy shoved me to the ground and stole my purse as I walked back to my dorm one night. The responding officer seemed rather impatient and incredulous as I shakily tried to tell him what happened. He either didn't believe me or just didn't want to be bothered, and the memory of his attitude towards me has always stayed with me. Also, my friend's husband had a bit of weed in the house, and when I told him what happened, he became rather paranoid about the police searching the house and finding it if I called them. So I didn't call. I'll always regret not calling. My friend and her husband no longer live in that house, and that guy was never seen again. We think that he was some drifter who happened to see an opportunity to harass a woman or worse, and tried to seize it. To say that I had a lot to be thankful for the next day is an understatement. I'm thankful for the friends who talked to me calmly and waited for me to stop freaking out so I could tell them what happened. I was talking about 1,000,000 miles per second, and it took a few minutes for me to get everything out. I would have hung up if it were me. I'm thankful for my ex-boss at the bar where I used to work. He sent 2 bouncers, door guys, to help me, and they helped me pack up, drove me home, and stayed with me the rest of the night. More importantly, I'm thankful that I'm still here and that I learned to listen to the twinge more. That's probably the biggest lesson to come from this. Don't ignore that feeling. I haven't given it much thought, so I have no idea if any of this makes sense. I'm still in a bit of shock, because the whole thing plays like a movie in my mind, and the only reason I'm sharing it is because the memory is messing with me this week, and I just have to get it out. I created a second Reddit account just to tell this story. I don't want to ever look at my regular account's posts and see it staring back at me. It's never bothered me this much before, but for some reason, this Thanksgiving season just dredged it all up. I wish my mind would go back to blocking the memory, like it's done for the past 2 years. But that's not happening. I'm already seeing a therapist for my depression, so I'll eventually tell her the story too. I ate all of the things this week, beyond what's expected for a holiday week, and I usually don't do that, so I obviously have to talk to her about it soon. Anyway, creepy dude who stalked me for 2 days and thought he was going to hurt me. Fuck you. And let's not meet. 5. Okay, so this encounter happened back in 2009. I was 17 years old and in year 11 at high school. It was a weeknight and I had just left my then boyfriend's house, probably around 6 p.m, to catch the train home. I caught buses and trains everywhere, so I had the pleasure of bumping into a lot of quirky people quite often. But this night was different. I was waiting at the train station. It was still somewhat light out, and I was the only person on the platform at that point, because around that time of day was still considered peak hour. I usually didn't have to wait long for my train, but on this fateful day, it had been delayed. I was sitting halfway down the platform on a bench, and about 10 to 15 meters away, a man joined me in waiting for the train. He had a phone to his ear and was quietly talking to someone. Obviously, I thought nothing of it. A few minutes passed, and I noticed the man had hung up his phone and was slowly edging closer to where I was sitting, shooting me quick glances. Now, I suffer from fairly terrible anxiety, so immediately start feeling a little nervous. I watch his movements out of the corner of my eye. He's tall, muscular looking, probably in his mid to late 20s. Sure enough, he's eventually made his way over to my bench, but doesn't sit down. After a few minutes of silence, he says, "Hey," and I look over at him, pretending that I didn't just watch him slowly walk over to me and say hi back. "Where are you going tonight?" he asks, barely making eye contact with me. Just going home." He's silent for a while. I was praying he'd just walk away, but then, out of nowhere, begins telling me how sexy I look. Now, I remember at the time not getting scared at how abrupt and inappropriate this comment was, but laughing instead. I was tired, wearing no makeup, hair in a messy-ass bun, and I was wearing one of my boyfriend's giant jumpers. I looked like a big, ugly ball, and I seriously thought this guy was kidding around, but he looked unimpressed, almost angry when I laughed. Uncomfortable again, I just murmured thanks and kept my head down, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. He then asks me how old I am. I tell him 17, underage. But that definitely doesn't deter him. "You should come with me," he says, and I immediately begin to panic all over again. But because back then I was way too polite and never wanted to hurt anyone's feelings, instead of telling this guy to leave me the fuck alone, I start making up shitty excuses why I needed to get home as soon as possible. I have family coming for dinner. I have so much homework. I'm not feeling very well. He looks annoyed, but ignores everything I've said and tells me there's a party tonight and he wants to take me. Without even thinking, I blurt out, "What the hell, you don't even know my name." He suddenly sits down next to me, his face serious. He tells me his car is in the parking lot about 100 meters away, and we should just go now. "It'll be fun, there's drinks and music, and I'll buy you some new clothes before we go anywhere." By this point my heart is beating out of my chest and I just want him to leave. Other people are arriving at the station now and I'm looking around at them desperately, trying to get someone's attention because I'm too scared to get up and move. I don't want him to see I'm scared, so I continue to smile, saying, "I'm really sorry, but I have a boyfriend and I gotta get home." "You'll forget about him." Then I see it. The most wonderful thing I've ever seen. My train was approaching the station. I was so close to getting away from this guy, but of course he saw it too. I began to gather my things and stand up. He grabbed my arm, pulling me back onto the seat. "Let's just go for a drive." I got to my feet and tried pulling my arm away from him, but he held on. I thought to myself, surely people are watching this, right? Someone will come and help me any moment now. But no one did. People could see me trying to get away from this man, but they were acting completely oblivious to it. The train rolled up to the platform, and people began to exit. I was trying to pull out of the guy's grasp. He suddenly let go without missing a beat. I hightailed it to the train carriage just before the door closed, breathing uncontrollably. People in the train are staring at me wide-eyed, no one asking me if I was okay or needed help. I looked out the train window, and the guy is staring in the window at me, his phone now back up to his ear. As the train slowly pulls away from the station, he begins walking back down the platform, and I'm guessing towards his car. At the time, I was just freaked out that a strange man had been so physically forceful with me. But 7 years down the track, I'm fully aware of how dangerous a situation that could have been. I know he clearly wasn't waiting for the train, and I don't want to know who he'd been on the phone to. Ever since then, I swore to myself that if I ever saw someone visibly uncomfortable or scared in public, I wouldn't turn a blind eye to it like those people did to me. 6. A bit of backstory. I'm a 17-year-old male living in New South Wales, Australia. I'm half Asian and, in a way, female-looking. I'm around average height and very thin. I have what you could call emo-esque hair. This coming into play later on. So this happened about 2 days ago. I live in a typical Australian suburb. Nothing out of the ordinary in Australia where I live. There is lots of heavily wooded areas, as well as very swampy areas. So here it goes. Me, in all my wisdom, decided to go for a walk. The area I went isn't frequently too travelled, as it's very rural, for the city I live in. It is where the new housing estates are getting built. I love this area, as it is so picturesque and quiet. Now I'm walking along, listening to music. It's about 40-ish minutes from my house to there, and you have to go through a lot of bushland. I should mention my neighbourhood backs onto an industrial estate which is in decline. I walk there. It's quite a normal day until I see a bunch of what looked like construction workers talking to each other, occasionally glancing at me. I thought nothing of it and kept on my merry way. Now this area, my safe haven, is on the fringe of both of what used to be industry and new houses. Where I always sat and looked into the distance, there was always a fence. I never went past it because of the barbed wire on top of it. That day I felt adventurous and saw there was a gap in the fence that led beyond. I checked on the workers in case they saw me. They were gone, so I went through. This is where it began. I walked for a solid 7 minutes into the area. When I sat in the grass, it's about up to my waist tall, to admire the view, when I heard in a male's voice, "Where the fuck did it get to?" I was freaked out a little, as this was a reserve, and I thought I was caught. So I dashed away into taller grass. Another male said, "We know you're here, come out." "You're not in trouble?" I was in full panic mode, like who would say that to someone, especially a stranger. I glanced at the people calling out for me, and no surprise, they were the fucking workers from the site. I assumed they must have followed me. Come out, little rabbit, we won't hurt you." "Well, not much," said a raspy female-sounding voice. I glanced at these workers. One had a roll of duct tape, another rope, and the female had a large wrench. I was taught as a kid how to get away from strangers in cars, but nothing of this fucking caliber. I grab a piece of large sandstone from the ground. It's light, and everywhere I live, I hurl it into the grass far away from me. "They go running, stupid fucktards," I thought to myself. I book it down through long grass and climb the fence into the industrial estate. As I'm over the fence, I see the workers on top of the hill pointing at me. They leg it towards me, yelling, "Oi, come back here!" I proceed to nope the fuck out of there, back to my house. I haven't seen these people since, but what frightens me the most is I'm pretty sure they thought I was a girl. I don't know what their intentions were, but they weren't good at all. So creepy, obviously fake workmen. Let's not meet again. 7. For my story, I think you need a little backup. My grandparents have this little house, close to the sea in a residential street. There, it's mostly full of old persons and in summer, full of kids, so it was quite a peaceful place, where a kid could walk without being afraid. Or I thought so. When I was maybe 6 or 7, my sister and I were home alone in this residential house. And none of my friends were out. My sister, being 3 years older than me, was watching TV, and didn't want to play with me. So I took a ball and went out to play. A few minutes later I got bored, and sat at the entrance of the house, thinking and feeling a bit lonely. My sister has always been a bit paranoid, so she went to check up on me a couple times. But this time was different. She didn't want to watch TV anymore and sat by me. We talked and joked around like some kids would. Then we noticed a car speeding up the streets. We thought nothing of it, except that those persons were crazy to drive that fast. Then, a couple minutes, we saw that car pass again, and again. At this point, my sister was freaking out, while I was confused as to why those persons would pass again and again. I first thought that maybe they took the wrong direction and got lost. Oh boy, was I wrong. That car passed one more time. But this time they entered the residence. and parked the car right in front of us. The windows were pitch black. My sister got up and so did I. The window rolled down only to show 4 men in the car. One was driving and looked like he was the oldest. With a cigar in his mouth, he looked like he was in his 50s, and the 3 others were between 19 and 27, I think. They were all smoking, all smiling at us. One of them looked super excited, and looked me in the eyes and waved at me to come. Then they all started to call for me as my sister was opening the door. She pulled me in and closed it. We waited for about 15 minutes, and they were still there, looking at our door, waiting for us to come out. 20 minutes later, they were gone. When I think about it, I'm seriously scared and thankful to my sister, but still I wonder what would have happened if my sister didn't stop watching TV or if those guys tried to break in. Please be careful when you're outside. And to those creepy men, let's not meet again. 8. This happened 2 months after I left the apartment. Let me tell you, this is the reason why I wanted the apartment, was to avoid Josh. Moving into my dorm, it was on a Friday, since upperclassmen normally moved in later than freshmen. But I was dreading the fact that I had to be in the same building as my ex-friend, who was really creepy. I met Josh my freshman year, and at first, everything was fine. We became friends, and he told me about his dark past. Pretty much, at first, he was all right. But as the semesters went on, Josh got very clingy to me, which was kind of freaking me out. He started following me around, wanting to spend, quote, quality time with his best friend. After I told Josh I wasn't interested in a relationship with him and wanted to be friends, that was when everything changed for the worse. We parted ways after freshman year, but little did I know, my second year was only going to be worse. Now, speaking of the present as a sophomore, I was happy because not only was I away from Nick, the creeper I'd met the previous year, but it also meant that I would get my own single dorm. Once I moved in and got settled, after the hall meeting that the RAs give each floor to welcome new people, I was currently working on my desk, scheduling classes and checking my email. It was probably 11 p.m. when I heard a knock on my door. I live in a co-ed dorm, so females and males were on certain floors, but still lived together. Opening my door, I couldn't believe it was Josh standing there with a smile on his lips, almost too excited to see me again. How the hell did he find out where my room is, since the dorm had 9 floors? He leaned against my doorframe and spoke. Hey Courtney, so good to have you back again in the dorms. What happened to the apartment you wanted? I cringed, didn't want to tell him about the neighbor I had, who thought it was alright to jack off in front of my door. It was fine, I didn't like the apartment. I'm kinda busy, can we talk tomorrow? Honestly, I wasn't busy, I just wanted rid of him because he made me feel uncomfortable. Shaking his head, Josh only leaned in closer. Come on, Courtney. Let's go to late night and get something to eat. We have a lot to catch up on. It's so cool we live in the same building. Again, I shook my head, telling him that I was busy, wanting to get my classes set up, and that I would meet him tomorrow. Finally, he left and I shut the door, going back to checking my school email. The weekend went by, everything was fine until Monday night. I came back from class around 3 p.m. and settled in my dorm to finish some homework. Josh lived on the 4th floor and I lived on the 5th floor. I needed to go to the store that was right down the street from my dorm, and when I left for the elevator, there Josh stood to wait for the elevator as well. Why would Josh be on the 5th floor when it was only females? And the only person he knew was me. Standing beside him, he grinned. Hey, what a chance that we would meet up again. I didn't feel excited at all, and knew he had no reason to be on my dorm floor, and also near my door, which is close to the elevator. Yeah, I'm just going to the store. What are your plans? The moment he spoke, I dreaded opening my mouth when he responded, Well, I was going to go to the store as well. I need some things for my room. We can go together. I wanted to be nice and offered a smile. Sure, that is fine. Once we were in the elevator, he kept looking at me with a smile, complimenting on how good I looked since he last saw me. Of course, I kept my distance, at least trying to, until finally, the elevator dinged, and without waiting for him, I left, heading out the doors and walking down the street to the store. Josh following close, we made a small, awkward talk. That was until a car stopped and a woman got out, going to Josh, yelling at him for trying to rape her daughter. I froze stiff hearing that and knowing of his dark past and how he was abused. I wasted no time walking to the store, leaving him behind. This could not be happening. Why could I not just get one break? Once I finished at the store, leaving, Josh was gone, so I headed back up to my room to unload some groceries. It was about 9 p.m. when I heard knocking on my door. It was Josh, demanding that I open the door, and he needed to speak with me about the incident. Shaking my head, I called out, "Go away and leave me alone, Josh." He kept knocking, taunting, saying that if I didn't open the door, I would be very sorry. Scared, I found my phone and messaged the RA on my floor, letting her know that Josh was bothering me. And after a few minutes, I heard my RA demanding that he leave the floor for disturbing the other girls. Breathing a sigh of relief, Josh thought that I could answer all his problems, but the guy was screwed up in his head. Here is where everything got worse. The next few nights, I found notes from Josh that were slid under my door saying that we needed to talk, that I shouldn't be ignoring him. It was a weekend, and I was doing laundry in the middle of the night since I couldn't sleep. But I felt a chill, like someone was watching me. Looking out the door, I spotted Josh right near the elevator, waving at me with a smile that was not pleasant. He looked angry that I was ignoring him. Not even getting my clothes out of the wash, I went toward my room quickly, shutting the door behind me, locking it. Calling security, I told them what was going on, and they would keep a lookout for Josh since it was against the rules to harass other students. Needing to get my clothes, I cautiously looked out, seeing that Josh was gone. No longer seeing him, quickly I went to the washroom, getting my clothes, but I noticed a pair of my favorite underwear was missing. Drying my clothes, I folded them and went back to my room, deciding to go to security tomorrow, but I couldn't without proof, and maybe I have misplaced them. Monday came around. I had a late class that normally got out about 8 p.m., the latest. And on my way to the dorm, I spotted Josh a few feet behind me, walking at a fast pace toward me, his voice calling out my name, that he wanted to speak. He was yelling at me and telling me I was being rude, and if I didn't stop, that I would be sorry. Turning around, I saw him coming toward me, and he had something behind his back. Not taking a chance, I whipped out my pepper spray and sprayed him square in the face, watching him fall to the ground, dropping what looked like a small pocket knife. I ran toward my dorm, informing them of Josh. But when campus security came, he was already gone. It was my word against his, and it seemed that Josh no longer had the knife when the cops questioned him. A few days later, I decided to live with my best friend in her apartment that her father owned. Now I can update you that I no longer stay in the dorms, and Josh has been kicked out of the dorms. But I made sure to change my schedule so that I wouldn't run into him. I will update more what is going to happen with Josh, myself, and the school. I hope to never see Josh again anytime soon. 9. This happened a little over a year ago at this point. I was working the night shift at a smaller Walmart that shared a parking lot with a dollar store. I know everyone assumes that Walmart is a magnet for creeps, and that the night shift seems like it would only increase the encounters. But surprisingly, I very rarely had any incidents with strange people in the 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. shifts I would work 5 days a week. The most I'd see was the occasional homeless person that would scare the daylights out of me after I'd accidentally stumble upon them in the parking lot. My job was maintenance, but since we didn't have any overnight cart pushers, I was usually the one sent out to go collect carts. Our Walmart was actually pretty popular at night, despite its size and the time of night. This meant I was almost constantly being sent out to go collect carts for the first half of my shift. This was how I ran into one of the weirdest encounters with a stranger I've ever had while working at Walmart, or anywhere for that matter. While gathering carts around 2 a.m., as the activity was beginning to die down, I saw a very old-looking van pull into the entrance between the Walmart and the dollar store. Although it ultimately parked in the empty dollar store parking lot, I got a good look at it as it first came in. It was very clearly in awful condition. It made a loud squeaking noise every time the tires made a full rotation, the exterior was covered in rust, and several of the windows seemed to have been broken. But the thing that stood out to me the most was, and I kid you not, in purple spray paint, the words, "Free Children's Bikes," was crudely painted on the side. The thing that just really creeped me out wasn't just this creepy van, but the fact that it pulled into the dollar store parking lot, and the fact that the dollar store was very clearly closed. I still had a lot of carts to go after, but I couldn't stop looking over at the van. Things just got creepier the more I looked at it. The interior was completely dark, and I couldn't see anyone inside of it. I never heard anyone leave the van, and I was the only one in that parking lot other than the person in that van. It just gave me the creeps. Eventually, I had to go and gather carts from the outskirts of the parking lot, some of which were even in the dollar store's parking lot. I knew I had to go collect them. My manager would throw a fit if I wasn't doing my job because of a creepy van, so I just sucked it up and went out to grab them. When I got a very yard from the van, suddenly the headlights turned on, and they were so bright I was blinded for a moment. At first I was terrified. I was about to be run over. But the van stood still. After standing there like an idiot, I realized I was probably the one looking like a creep to this person. So I went back to gathering carts and got them all sorted out as quickly as I could. But as I was heading back into the store, I heard the loud creak of the van door opening. I looked back long enough to see the man with a long, greasy black hair. He had tattered clothes, and he just looked like a mess, and he seemed to be heading towards the store entrance, towards me. I got back into the store right then and there. At least there I'd be around my co-workers, and I'd have strength in numbers if things went wrong. I mentioned something to my manager about it, but he told me not to make a big deal about it. I didn't expect much sympathy from him anyway, but it really did suck. Getting back to my normal work routine, I got a dust mop and began sweeping up the floor. As I went through the aisles, I'd often pass some of the overnight stalkers filling up the shelves, but other aisles were just empty. Around 15 minutes into my sweeping, I turned around a corner into the pet food aisle and I saw him. He didn't have a cart or any items in his hand. It was immediately clear that he wasn't in that aisle for pet food. He was there for me. He walked up in front of me and he started saying something to me. I say something because I legitimately had a hard time understanding him. He slurred his words hard, and it didn't help that I'm hard of hearing. I asked him to repeat himself, and the second time all I really got out of it was, "So that he doesn't work here anymore." I didn't really catch the name, but I'm pretty sure that was what he said. I told him I didn't know what he meant, and he just kept going on and I legitimately couldn't understand him. Eventually I told him I'd go contact one of my supervisors for more help, and that's when he just screamed, "No!" I wasn't sure what to do, so I just backed away and I was ready to run. But he didn't chase after me. He just backed out of the aisle as well and turned away. Maybe he knew I was going to grab a manager or something. Everything remained normal for a while after that. At 3 a.m., I clocked out for my scheduled lunch. I'm not much of a people person, so I avoided the break room, or other common places during lunch. Instead, I'd go out and eat in my car where I could listen to my own radio stations and I could be in peace. What I'd usually do is lift up the divider between the driver's and passenger seat, and I'd lay across the seat. It'd give me an hour to just lay down for a bit anyway. I'd usually lay my head against the driver's side window, because it was nice and cold. This night, around 30 minutes into my break, I felt that distinct feeling that I was being watched. I looked over my shoulder outside the window and there he was, standing right outside my driver's side door. My heart felt like it skipped a beat, and I just panicked. I just wanted to know what this guy wanted from me. Was it because I kept looking at his van? In that moment I was so glad I was always paranoid something like this would happen, and because of that, I would lock the doors every time I would eat in my car. I started my car and I quickly pulled out of the spot I was parked in. I just drove off and out of the parking lot. I didn't need to be back for another 30 minutes anyway, so I just drove around for a while to take my mind off of things. I pulled back into the Walmart parking lot around 20 minutes later, and I saw the dollar store with 3 or 4 police cars with their sirens going off, surrounding the van. I went back inside, clocked in, and thankfully didn't see the guy anywhere. I asked my manager what was with the cars, and he said a customer complained about it and had them call the cops. I didn't see the guy ever again, but I had nightmares about it for weeks. Thankfully, I ended up getting an internship later, and I just quit that job as soon as I could because it wasn't the same after that. 10. One night, my friend Alex and I got an address for a party from an Instagram page. We were both 19 at the time and always looking for a new adventure. So going to a sketchy address off of a random Instagram page didn't seem like a bad idea. It was. We drove about 20 minutes from my house and started getting a good feeling about the odds of it being a rager. We were slowly ascending a large hill that overlooked the sea of lights from the California suburbs, when Google Maps finally told us to turn left and reach our destination. We turned onto a barren dirt road that had no address or sign of life. We hadn't seen any cars the entire time we had been on this hill. When we got to the top, we were stuck at a dead end. All that was there in this little turnaround was a shipping crate with a dirty mattress right next to it. Well, Alex and I were pissed that there was no party, and nobody in sight. So we went on our phones looking for somewhere else to go. I parked on the side with my headlights facing straight at the shipping container, whose backside was hidden by bushes. It was eerily silent. Well, next thing I know, a car pulls up and blocks me in. I can't see who's in it, but they roll down their windows and shout, "Damien!" Alex and I look at each other like, what the fuck is going on? And that's when we hear a noise from the shipping container. Boom! Boom! The voice from the car says, "Damien! Come out!" It's followed by another boom coming from the shipping container. Right as I'm about to ask Alex where the fuck that sound came from, I hear a roar from the bushes, and then walks out a 6-foot cholo covered in blood with a ripped shirt. He's breathing heavily and is covered in dirt leaves that are sticking to the trails of blood all over his body. He had been in the bushes only 1 or 2 feet away from us earlier, when we had gone out to look around. Anyways, my mind is racing as I watch this go down in front of the car. My headlights are shining at him, and he's just standing there screaming. The 2 women got out of the car and tried to get him in their car, but he's screaming like a madman and tweaking around. He keeps slamming his fist on the container and saying that he's going to kill her. Alex and I say fuck this and drive down the hill a little. He seems to have calmed down a little more, and the women are talking to him at a distance. I go back on my phone, and as soon as I open a Snapchat, Alex yells, "He's running to the car!" I quickly look back and see him fully sprinting towards us. He was so close I could have reached out and grabbed him. I threw my car in drive and fucking gassed it. We parked way down the hill to catch our breath and recap on what the hell just happened. Then we hear sirens. 6 police cars fly past us and stop only a few hundred meters in front of us. I look over. The bloody cholo is standing in front of all of them in a fighting stance. A snarl on his face and breathing heavily. The police shout for him to get on the ground and he charges them. One of the cops deployed his taser and the cholo slammed onto the ground. The cops then told us to leave. On our way out, we pass the 2 ladies in the car. They smile and wave and say, "Thanks, boys," and we drive away. It wasn't exactly the rager we thought it was, but it was definitely an eventful and memorable night. 11. If you are on Twitter or Facebook, or simply watch the news, then you should know the incidents about clowns being seen. And unfortunately I came in contact with one 2 weeks ago. I live in Ohio and every Tuesday and Thursday I have morning practice for high school basketball. We usually just do weights or running, but that's not the point. So morning practice starts at 5:45 and I live a good 10-minute drive from my school. So I usually leave around 5:30 to 5:30 a.m. I do drive my own car, so I go by myself. And just the walk from my door to the car is the most stressful thing, because I am terrified of the dark. Every time I have to sprint to my car, throw my bags in the car and drive 100 miles per hour out of my neighborhood, because nighttime plus poorly lit neighborhood equals a horror movie. So to get on with the story, I left my house, but instead of running and being all scared, I decided to face my fears and calmly walk to my car. Which was a bad idea. My house is at the end of a cul-de-sac, and the sidewalk leads to a small hill, greenbelt, and to more neighborhoods. It's confusing, but it's really creepy. So I am walking to my car, and I put my bags in the car, and my hands start to shake because I am afraid. I felt like someone was watching me, so I looked up to the small hill area, and I see a figure standing there. I literally almost crapped my pants and ran to the other side of the car, jumped in, turned the car on, and my headlights almost perfectly illuminated the figure. It was a clown. I handle flight or fight situations terribly because I usually run away but then stop and freeze in fear, and this was the case. I literally sat in my car watching this figure just stare back. I didn't scream, call 911 or anything. I just sat there yards away from my neighbors and this stupid clown. Thankfully I snapped out of it and started to drive away. I thought to myself, I'm totally safe. I'm in a car that won't break down on me. And in the middle of that thought, I looked in my rear mirror and saw this dumbass fucking clown sprinting at my car. So I floored it, and my car went vroom. I've never seen my car go from 0 to 60 that fast in my life. I drive a Chevy Cruze. Cruise, the car is supposed to cruise. Thankfully I am safe. I told my coach what happened and he literally laughed at me. I told my parents when I got home and they called the police. Clearly they cannot do anything about it. But I was so scared and now I am not allowed to go to morning practice unless my dad drives me. God bless. Creepy clown, go get a life and let's never meet again. 12. I had a job vacancy at our company. I'm head of HR and conduct all the interviews. I had an interview planned about a week ago for a guy to attend. Well, he arrived, I invited him up to my office and waited for him at the top of the stairs. He was young and dressed in a tracksuit. The problem was that he had emailed me the day before asking what the dress code here was and could he have some advice about interview attire, and I had informed him to come dressed smartly. I said hello to him and he just stopped and stared at me before asking if there were any men to interview him. I said no. I am the interviewer, to which he simply replied, "Oh, I would just have rather spoken to a man. You know." I point blank ignored this on purpose, and invited him into the office to start the interview. He then proceeds to tell me that he has been fired from every job he has had, and it was never his fault, stopping only to tell me that my hair was beautiful. Stared in silence at me for a good 10 seconds, and then carried on about his other jobs and how all his bosses had caused issues with him, but it was 100% not his punctuality. As he left, he lit a cigarette up inside the building. I rushed him out, to which he told me I was so dramatic, and it's not like he's going to burn the bin down like the last place. One of the guys that works on the level below me was outside smoking as he left and said hi to him. I went back upstairs. My co-worker then comes up and asks me why I was so rude to this guy. I asked, of course, what he meant. Apparently the guy had gone outside and told my co-worker that I had threatened him in order to get him out of the interview, and told him I don't employ people who are male. I obviously messaged him the day after, informing him that he had been unsuccessful on this occasion, but thanks for coming, blah blah blah. That's when the phone calls started. He would ring the office 20 times a day at least, asking if he had been given the position. Every time he was told no. I stopped answering the phone to him after a couple of days, so he started leaving voicemails, not asking about the job but just laughing down the phone, then hanging up and doing the exact same thing. I haven't heard anything since 2 days ago, so hopefully he got bored and moved on to the next employer. Anyway, crazy job seeker, I would really not like to meet you again. 13. Living in an area like Portland, Oregon, you learn to expect a certain amount of weirdness taking public transit. Being a woman living in any major city, you expect to, at one point, likely more, in your life encounter perverts or creeps. It goes with the territory, even if it shouldn't happen at all. This encounter happened a few years ago, but I still remember it. It changed my behavior when wandering alone at night, which is significant for me since I am an introverted night owl who prefers graveyard shift and shopping at 24-hour stores. In 2008, I was working at a call center, and my shift at the time had me clocking in at 7 p.m. and leaving at 4 a.m. Most nights I would leave with a couple of friendly co-workers, and we would wait for the Blue Line train to roll through, usually only a 10-minute wait on a weekday. At that point, all but one would part ways with me. Most of my co-workers lived closer to Gresham, and at the time I lived in Hillsborough. We were pretty good acquaintances by proxy of being on the same team and taking the same train, but not quite friends. She lived farther down than I did, so she usually sat with me until I got off. It was sometime in July, I forget the specific day, but it was hot enough even after dark that I opted to go to work in a spaghetti strap top and shorts rather than my usual t-shirt and jeans. The call center was casual dress, doubly so for graveyard shift, since our manager didn't care what we did, so long as it didn't get back to upper management or HR. That night I was alone for the walk to the max since half my team had called in, my train buddy included. I didn't think much of it, aside from being pissed off and exhausted from the extra workload. I suspected they had all bailed to attend a party a co-worker had advertised the week before. When my train came by, I honed in on a deserted section and claimed a forward-facing seat by the operator terminal, intent on ignoring the world and catnapping my way home. Someone getting on with a bike jolted me out of my daze because of the obnoxious clattering they make when people position them on the wall hooks. Apparently, scowling is considered a form of flirtation because the bike's owner made eye contact with me, smirked, and sauntered over to take a seat right across from me. It made me even more irritated because the car was deserted, aside from 2 people on the opposite end. I ignored him and stared out the window, longingly waiting for my stop. After a few minutes of being ignored, he leaned across the aisle to get my attention. "Hey, good morning. Work around here?" Polite enough, but I grunted non-committally in return. Not in the mood for small talk. It only seemed to encourage him. After a brief pause, he tried again, less subtly. "You're pretty." It's not the first time I've had people hit on me, but generally, when I put on my bitch face, they leave me alone. So it made my skin crawl uncomfortably to have it ignored. My disdainful frown didn't seem to register as he took my silence as an invitation to slip over to the seat directly beside me, blocking me in. This sent up red flags and wailing sirens in my head, even aside from the very obvious way he leaned in and peered, clearly trying to see down my shirt. I finally found my voice, leaning away. "I'm not interested." Any normal human being at that point would have realized they were being creepy, apologized, and moved. Not this guy. This guy smiled, reached into a pocket, and pulled out his phone. I was prepared to physically kick him out of the seat if he pointed the camera at me. So I was struck dumb for a minute when he calmly asked, "What's your number, sweetie?" It was as if he wasn't registering my reactions as unusual. Before I could think to respond, he glanced at me expectantly. "By the way, where's your friend tonight?" My blood ran cold, and I felt a little panicked at realizing he'd clearly watched me previous nights. But I didn't recognize him, as I'd come to recognize other regulars on the morning trains. Seeing a stop coming up, I stood abruptly. "This is my stop." That finally made him frown, but he switched back to his original seat, without comment, and having me loom over him. I'm 5'7" without heels. The second there was room enough to move without touching him, I made a beeline for the nearest store, not caring that it was still a good 3 stops from where I needed to be. I was in such a rush to get away from the uncomfortable situation that I didn't register the sound of someone taking a bike off a rack. I intended to just wait for the next train, but as I was walking towards the kiosk to look at the schedule, I finally noticed a clicking sound of bike gears behind me. Too afraid to draw attention to the fact that I'd been lying about my stop, I stared straight ahead and kept walking. The platform was deserted, so I knew it would be a while before the next train came by in either direction. The stop was one I wasn't familiar with, but I recalled that not far from it was a shopping center and a few apartment complexes. I walked purposefully and tried to pretend like I hadn't noticed I was being followed. Since he made no more advances, I got the sick feeling that he intended to follow me home. I stuffed my hands into my pockets to feel for my phone, and a small pocket knife I keep out of paranoia for just such a situation. I thought about calling 911, but since nothing physical had happened yet, I knew they wouldn't take it seriously, and I didn't want to provoke him with such an obvious gesture. The walk seemed to take forever, even though I now know the shopping center is only about a quarter mile from the stop. The stores and parking lots were deserted, but it was situated on the corner of a busy intersection, and a little further down I could see a lit gas station sign. I walked a bit faster. I must have looked as freaked out as I felt, because when the attendant spotted me through the front window, he came out from behind the counter. When I walked in, he was looking past me. "Friend of yours?" I shook my head emphatically and explained that the man had followed me from the train. The attendant nodded in understanding, discreetly going back behind the counter and picking up the phone while I made my way to the back of the store, staying close to an employees-only door by the coolers. I pretended to browse the aisles as I listened to the attendant talk to who I could only assume was his manager, finally turning around to see just where the creep was. My stomach dropped. He was standing just outside the window, smiling, staring straight at me. He made no move to follow me inside, but he looked prepared to wait. More than a little scared, I made my way to the counter. The attendant looked annoyed as he hung up the phone. "My manager's on the way. There's not much I can do until then since he hasn't done anything. You can stay in here, and if he comes in, I can ask him to leave. Should get busier soon." He offered the last feebly, unsettled as well. Throughout the wait, the man didn't budge, just stood there smiling and blinking. It was a tense few minutes until finally a car pulled up and a heavy-set older Latino man jumped out. He paused a moment to assess the situation before approaching the creep. I couldn't hear exactly what was said, but it sounded like the manager was pissed and the smile finally vanished. I thought I was going to be sick from relief after a few brief moments as the man hopped back on his bike and pedaled off. Shaking a little as the adrenaline started wearing off, I thanked them both and explained what had happened on the train. The manager offered to drive me home, but, stranger danger on high alert, I declined. I did accept an offer to walk me back to the MAX station, and he waited with me, keeping an eye on the platform, until the next train came. I made it home without further incident, but I was jumpy and paranoid at passing bikes for a good long while afterwards. I stopped going out at night, and instead tolerated sleep deprivation on my weekends to shop during the day. After my train buddy heard what happened, we exchanged numbers and we let each other know when we'd be calling out sick. I never quite felt secure in my home or at work after that, wondering just how long that creep had been watching, without me or my coworker noticing. I declined to renew my lease when it came due, and had a coworker with a car help me move. Shortly after that, I quit work and found a new job on a bus line. So, creepy, eco-conscious Max Line stalker, let's not meet again because I bought a taser. 14. My friend Mike and I were walking downtown around 4 p.m. one evening, 2 summers ago. We were walking back from the local market where I had been taking pictures for a photo series for my photography class final. I was also taking pictures on the way there and on the way back. My theme was my home city's downtown. We were a couple blocks away from my house and had decided that we were gonna stop at the gas station that was on the way and only 1 block from my house. Mike was on the left and we were walking on a long stretch of sidewalk on the right side of the road. There are typically a lot of trees providing shade on this road, but about the last 100 feet before reaching the crosswalk had no trees, and the bright sunlight made it easy to see. Mike and I were laughing and talking so much that we didn't notice a guy standing towards us, to the left of Mike slightly, about 50 feet away. Mike and I learned after talking about this whole situation, noticed a man staring at us at the same time and kept talking to each other and not acknowledging him. Mike, however, looked at him and later told me that he looked really pissed off. We both noticed, however, that he was a tall white guy wearing a black hoodie with the hood down and jeans. Right as we passed him, we saw in our peripheral that he immediately turned and started following us. Without saying anything to each other, Mike and I immediately picked up our pace as we knew something was off. We were so unnerved that Mike dropped his barely smoked cigarette at one point, and we didn't stop to pick it up because the guy was following us, but even faster because we could hear his footsteps behind us. We crossed the street to the left by the end of the block, after where the man had originally started following us. He followed us and crossed the street too. We picked up the pace even more, and so did the man. Mike and I finally spoke, and I said that we should go to the gas station as we originally planned, instead of my house, even though we were scared so he wouldn't know where I lived. By this next block, we made a left down a smaller street in order to get to the gas station. There weren't as many cars going by like there were on the first street, but the gas station was close. By the time we made it to the gas station's front door, for some reason I didn't think the man had followed us. Through the crowded parking lot, all the way up to the door. I was still super flustered and was still trying to act as if nothing was wrong, and walked straight toward the coffee pots and cappuccino machine because that's what I had originally planned on getting when we decided to come to the gas station, before we had encountered the man who followed us. Mike, who was thinking clearly, however, went straight toward the cash register to ask the woman working for help. I didn't notice Mike, didn't follow me through, and began pouring myself some coffee, and all of a sudden, out of my peripheral, I saw the same tall man directly beside me, on my right, staring at me. His gaze and presence felt so strong and negative, I was terrified and continued what I was doing. I then saw, without ever turning my head to look, that he had also grabbed a cup and one of those tall containers of generic brand sugar. He began super erratically pouring the sugar all over the counter and the ground, and then slammed it on the counter, spilling it even more. The lids were on the other side of him, but before I moved I couldn't help but look up at him. His hood was now pulled so tight around his face that all I could see was his small circle of a face scowling at me. I was so terrified I grabbed the lid on the other side and ran over to the counter. Mike, who was scared after seeing the man had followed me after he was done talking to the woman, asked why I went over there in the first place, and I said that I hadn't noticed he followed us into the store. By the look on the cash register woman's face, I could tell Mike already told her what had happened, and she then immediately led us to a room in the back where we could hide. Once in the back room, the door was still creaked open, and I saw him standing there staring at us. And then I told the woman and Mike what he just did. The woman went back out and said she didn't see the man we described, because she was so busy talking to Mike that she didn't notice him in the first place, and then didn't see his face when we passed him to get to the back room. Another employee, who was a male, really scared me when he came in the back room, because he was similar looking to the other man, and was wearing a black hoodie with the hood down. I then realized he was way shorter though, so it couldn't have been the same guy. We told him what had happened, and he offered to go out and check if he was around the building. While he was out looking around, I was able to find a phone charger that belonged to an employee, which matched my phone, and charged it because it had been dead for a long while. Once it was charged, I called the police and told them where Mike and I were and what happened. They sent a car, and a cop took more of our information and the description of the man. The cop said he would contact us if they ever found out anything, and then escorted us in his car as we walked the last block to my house. We never heard from the cops on the matter afterwards, but I was really scared for a while after that the man may have still been walking around the neighborhood, and if I ran into him again, what he would do. It's been 1.5 years now, and I haven't seen the man again, all the times I've been home from school, and I hope I don't ever again. I will also wonder why he followed us so aggressively, and for what reason he was so angry at us. Was he just trying to freak us out, or was it something more sinister? 15. A few years ago, I lived near a large expanse of national forest that was riddled with small winding trails and a larger set of roads that had been set up for forestry. It was about half a mile walk from my home over to the Red Road, as I like to call it, a relatively well-kept lava rock pathway. Regardless of the season, even in the beginnings of a snowstorm, I still spent at least an hour a day out there. When I got a puppy, I easily integrated him into my walks. Whippets love following a bike or hitting up a hiking trail. Sun, rain, or snow, he would follow me soundlessly, generally on a leash while near the houses, then off leash when I got deep into the woods. He was like my shadow, and though he would occasionally bound ahead, he would stop and turn back to look at me when he got a bit too far ahead. One day, I was out later in the day. The sun was starting to set, and it had grown chilly to the point that I put a coat on the dog from out of my pack, and decided to cut my trip short. As I was nearing civilization, I called my dog to me and leashed him up, thinking I may have heard a car. We rounded the corner, coming out of the copse of trees and into the open ground. I slow my walk instantly when I see an older black car parked near the entrance where pavement turns to gravel. People would very occasionally park near the entrance, but for some reason, this car causes me pause. It's bright black, with oversized silver rims and a small spoiler on the back. There's a man with a baseball cap leaning against the open passenger side window. He's gesturing violently to the people in the car, and he speaks to them in angry tones, although I'm too far away to hear. But it's enough that I instantly decide to steer clear of the group. Unfortunately, there is no way out but on the path they are parked on. My dog is a little spooked and is pushing against my legs and looking up at me. It doesn't help settle my nerves. I've seen people park there before, I reason, but I get the distinct impression that they may be dealing something very common where I'm at. I don't want to be caught in the middle, so I skirt along the road, as far from the vehicle as I can. Even then, walking on the edges of the trees, they turn to look at me, and their angry voices cease momentarily. I hear them say something about my dog, but I just keep walking, doing what I can to ignore them. I feel my heart rattling in my chest for reasons I'm unsure of. Something feels off about them, but I'm unsure. Once they're out of earshot, and I have walked quite a distance from them. I put my headphones back in, trying to lessen my nervousness. I'm looking down at the pavement, trying to refocus myself, when my dog begins to pull back on the leash. I give him a light tug forward and tell him to heel. I keep walking, feeling strange, and making my pace a little more brisk. Again my dog pulls on the leash. I frown at him in annoyance, unaccustomed to his disobedience. I pull him forward one more time, but this time I see his head turn back to look behind us. It catches my attention. I rip out my headphones and stare back the way we came. My dog lets out a high-pitched yip, looking back and then up at me. The man with the baseball cap is a short ways behind us. I grip the leash tighter and instantly spin around, quickly leading my dog toward the subdivision where the houses are. I figure the guy is just walking home. No big deal. But that doesn't do anything to dispel the slight edge of panic I am beginning to feel. Something is not right. The whippet begins looking back, and I have to tug him along. The hair bristles on his back, and he lets out a few fearful yips. My dog rarely barks, and he loves strangers, so his reaction only feeds my inner paranoia. I steal a glance over my shoulder and realize, much to my horror, he's getting closer. I can see his face more clearly, though he's still a distance away. I begin to rationalize that I am simply being paranoid. Despite this thought, I reach my hand behind me and into my pack, fishing my cell out of the side pocket and slipping it in my jeans. The man's presence is making me anxious, so I take the first right onto a gravel road that isn't even mine. I feel a rush of relief, thinking he'll head straight on the main road. And it will be fine. But it isn't fine. I hear the crunch of gravel behind me. The dog is yanking wholeheartedly on the leash. My adrenaline suddenly whooshes into my bloodstream, and I feel my hands get clammy. No, he must just live down this road, I think, trying to soothe myself. It's a loop, the road I picked, so I know that it goes back to the main road toward where I live. But as I near the end of the loop, I chance a glance back. The man in the baseball cap and the dark shirt. He's still behind me, keeping his distance, but still seemingly closer than before. Full-blown panic erupts. I know now that he appears to be following me. For what intent, I don't know. I can try to get to a house, but most of them have fences and gates, and people don't take too well to trespassers. I quickly pull my phone out of my pocket and flip it open, selecting home. It rings several times, making my blood pump erratically. My mom is home, but disabled, and often gets tired and falls asleep. It's about to go to the voicemail, but she picks up, sounding groggy. "Someone's following me," I blurt out as quietly as I can. She instantly asks me where I am, and I whisper into the phone, carefully glancing over my shoulder. He's very close now, maybe 15 feet, and my dog is going crazy. She says she'll be right there. I walk as fast as I can without running, and I realize that the man behind me is also walking faster, and instead of increasing the distance between us, it remains the same. The houses are far from the gravel road, so I don't know where to go. I could try to get up to a house and pound on a door, but then I wonder about the black car and if they have something to do with it. What if he calls them and they come too? I am panicking, and I know my mom isn't far from me, so I start to jog, and my dog is keeping up, but constantly looking back. Suddenly a large truck comes into view. A huge wave of dust is plumbing behind it. It comes to a very rapid halt in front of me, and I look back to see the man in the baseball cap sprinting into a yard to the left, running over someone's lawn, and then disappearing behind the house. My mom is getting out of the truck and comes over to me, saying breathlessly, "Is that him? Is that the guy who was following you?" I nod. There's no sight of him now. He's gone, having fled between the houses and probably out onto a main road. We get into the truck and my mom is red-faced and panicked, but seems to be slowly calming down. "I don't want you going out anymore," she says, looking over at me. She starts driving us home, but I can't help wondering if that man with the baseball cap will be standing out in the road. When I look back, the gravel path is empty, except for the haze of dust we've left behind. I don't go out for weeks, and when I finally convince my mom to let me go, I have to pack a knife in my bag to placate her. Even then, every time I walk to the open trail where I saw the black car, I always get nervous and somewhat angry. Angry that a stranger tried to make me afraid of the one thing I really love. 16. I work a pretty well-paid audit shift as a graveyard worker for a hotel full-time, and had some weird occurrences lately. Will probably update if it keeps happening. Having an outlet might help calm me down. Background. I'm a consistent graveyard all the time, and usually nothing too weird ever happens. I've been hit on here or there, but it's usually pretty easy to stop that in its tracks politely. Nobody likes to be rejected, but I'm not out to be cruel, I just don't flirt at work. That said, what happened last night is something I've never encountered. I was starting my shift, and it was pretty normal as far as paperwork and reservation calls go, but sometime during the night, I got a couple of calls ending with a sudden hang-up. Okay, nothing too weird, as sometimes our phones can be a bit buggy, so I thought nothing of it. Well, about the third or fourth time I got an outside call, I finally heard breathing, and what sounded like whispering. I was immediately on alert. My first instinct was that it was someone nearby who was in a situation that made it so they couldn't speak loudly. Maybe a guest staying with someone abusive. I tried my best to coax them to speak louder, and I wish I didn't. Strange man. "Hey, I want you to know something." At this point, once I could hear him, I realized this wasn't right. His breathing was very rhythmic and slow, and he kept making soft moans. This made me uncomfortable. Sir, are you calling about your reservation? Or are you currently staying in the hotel? Him. "No, I'm not there yet, but I like watching you." I was straining to listen, but this was already starting to freak me out. I work in a secure building in a back office without windows. I rarely deal with guests in person, and couldn't think of how this guy saw me with any regularity. "I'm sorry, I can barely hear you. Do I know you?" Him. "No, you don't. Promise not to be mad at me." What? Him. "I think I'm going to come see you." You're so beautiful. I like watching you walk into work from where you park. At this point, I hung up and notified my manager. He called 13 more times, trying to edge me into a sexual conversation. But I just started directly transferring them to the voicemail line. My manager says she'll keep an eye on it, and if he calls on any more of my shifts, she wants me to call the police. Tonight when I got to work, someone was parked in the back on the employee lot with tinted windows, and I could see an outline of a man with a cigarette. I am the only employee scheduled on at this time. Nobody should be out there. Dear creepy whispering man, can we please not meet? Update. I've already taken care of what I can, but when I got on tonight, my co-worker said every shift has had heavy breathing calls since my days off. Every shift. I think he's trying to figure out my schedule. I'm literally shaking as I type this. What the hell is wrong with people? I have an officer in the area aware, and my manager is working with the police. As for me, I went ahead and did something I, technically, shouldn't have. I made a skeleton key with my security access. If I have to duck into a room, any room for any reason, I can. I've started parking in front of the building in well-lit areas too. I hope my inaccessibility drives him off. I'll be getting pepper spray in the morning. 17. Please be aware the following story contains animal cruelty. This whole thing happened a few months ago. I love my family, but they are really religious and conservative, and as a gay man that can be quite problematic. I have never come out to my family, and only a handful of people know about my sexual orientation. I used to hate that I'm gay, and I am still quite sensitive about it. Anyway, about 3 or 4 months ago I decided to give Tinder a go, for shits and giggles. On my second day on Tinder I came across a guy called Lucifer Z. A guy with long pink hair, all black contact lenses, his face was covered with piercings, and both arms covered with sleeve tattoos. I can't recall if I did it to be rebellious towards my Christian upbringing, or if I really did think he was attractive, or because I'm obsessed with all things macabre and horror-related. However, I gave him a like and moved on. A few hours later I got a message from Lucifer Z, saying that he thought I was pretty cute. I didn't know how to feel about this. On the one side I was flattered, but on the other, Christian upbringing aside, I was disgusted with myself that I had put myself in this position. The next day I decided to message him back. Fast forward to a month later. After a lot of Tinder messages, texting, and Snapchat conversations, I agreed to meet him. He said his band was playing in a heavy metal nightclub in the city, and that I should come and watch, so I did. After his set, we met up, got drunk, and had a wild night. The next morning I woke up in bed with him in his apartment. He was really sweet that morning, looking so much different without all his black contact lenses and piercings. He made me breakfast, we talked about this and that, and then I went home. We texted and called over the next few days, going out places together. I had really fallen for him. Then things got really fucked up. He texted me on a Saturday night, asking me if I wanted to come with him to a devil-worshipping ritual at some guy who I've never met's place. I declined, not really feeling comfortable with the whole thing. He texted me back, "Suit yourself, bitch." I didn't know if he said this because he was angry with me for not wanting to go with him, or if he meant it as a joke. Either way, I forgot about it. At 2 a.m. he texted me this really disturbing and fucked up video of him and 2 other guys dressed in black robes murdering a sheep. I was really disturbed by this and called him, launching abuse at him for sending me the video. All he said in reply was, "Satan wants your soul, gorgeous." I was stunned into silence. It was such a weird bloody thing to say. And it wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it. From the sound of his voice I could tell he was on ice. He called himself a casual meth head, whatever the fuck that is. I instantly freaked out and blocked him from everything. 2 weeks later I decided to unblock him. This was a big mistake. He sent me a Snapchat of him holding a dead cat with the caption, "I'm gonna slit your throat and fuck your corpse, motherfucker." I almost blacked out from fear and immediately called the cops. They picked him up and told him to leave me alone and then charged him with animal cruelty charges. They found the sheep killing video and another video of him killing a dog on his phone. I haven't heard from him after the police got involved and am relieved that I can finally put this whole fucked up incident behind me. Thanks for letting me tell my story. I needed to get it off my chest. Since this incident, I haven't dated again, and probably won't for a long time. 18. One beautiful sunny day, I was driving home from a job interview that was near the beach. It was so hot, I had all the windows rolled down in my Prius. I was just jamming my music, feeling good about my interview, when I noticed a man on his motorcycle in front of me. Nothing was wrong so far. I was just going a normal 40 to 45 miles an hour. And I was following at a safe pace, when suddenly he just pressed on his brakes. Since I was at a safe pace, I didn't come close to hitting him, but I still had to press on my brakes, and I obviously got a little freaked out. I didn't want to scream at the guy, but I wanted to let him know it scared me, so when I drove by, I told him in a calm yet stern voice, "You need to watch how you're driving." I am a girl, and I was about 18 and very tiny and petite. I was not even trying to be scary, menacing, or anything bad. I just wanted to let him know what was up. I then pulled up to a red light when Crazy Man proceeds to speed over 2 lanes, come up behind me, jump off his motorcycle, and scream wildly that he had his daughter on his motorcycle. She was 16 to 21, acting like it was me who almost hit them, but remember, I was behind them and didn't even come close to them. Then he pulls a giant hunting, fishing, gutting knife and walks up to my open driver's window. I can see him hesitating towards me, then changing his mind and stabbing my tire. This is where things get silly. So that was the 4th week in a row my tire had gone flat. Things kept happening. I parked on a nail, hit a sidewalk, etc. So I was very flustered about having to buy another tire. So I stupidly jumped out of my car in anger. Keep in mind I'm leaving an interview, so I'm wearing a pencil skirt and heels. And he's obviously surprised and runs back to his motorcycle. I then yell, "Hell no, you're not getting away!" while jumping on the front of his motorcycle and punching him all over the forehead. He then turns on the motorcycle and speeds off, knocking me off the motorcycle in the process. Then his girlfriend, wife, who was on the motorcycle behind this commotion, actually tries to run me over while driving away in her crotch rocket motorcycle. I actually had to roll out of the way and was very close to being hit at a fast speed from a motorcycle. It was like 1 p.m. on a really hot day, so there were a lot of witnesses, about 20 of them. They had already called the cops during the confrontation, so the cops came right away and actually arrested them within the hour. I went with the cop in his car to go identify them, and the cop actually started hitting on me, which is his own story. Anyways, it was weird because even though Crazy Man was saying it was his daughter, she was sitting on the sidewalk handcuffed. They were all handcuffed and sitting on the sidewalk. Crazy guy, girlfriend, and daughter. Someone out there who's a professional. Why would the daughter get handcuffed when she didn't participate at all? If anything, she was dragged in by her crazy father. I never got any more follow-up from the courts or police after that day, so I don't know what happened. Setting: I live in Huntington Beach, California. It is a suburb of Los Angeles. It is a big, small town. I see people I have seen my whole life, but then I always see noobs. It is a famous city and always changing, but it's the same in some ways. Crazy shit has happened here. Even the formation of a wild cult. But I don't think it was ever as wild as LA. Apparently it still is. The man was a whitewashed Mexican guy in his 30s to 40s. He was wearing a blue plaid button-down shirt, buttoned all the way to the neck, with the collars slightly popped and jean shorts. The daughter was wearing tight low jeans and a puffy white jacket. I didn't really get a good look at the girlfriend. The motorcycles they had were very nice, clean, shiny, colourful, brand new looking. It was strange they acted ghetto, but had semi-nice clothes and pretty nice motorcycles. 19. This happened about 3 years ago. I have worked at a state-run mental institute for about 5 or 6 years now. All the patients who come here are court-ordered. We don't do self-admittance here. So we get most of the local high-profile criminals who are either mentally ill or need to be screened because they are claiming they are. The institution houses around 350 to 400 patients. So after you've worked here for a few years, it's pretty common to bump into someone who has been released, especially being a smaller town. Normally it's pretty chill. A simple wave from a distance or a quick, "How are you?" As employees, we cannot legally approach them in public, but they can approach us. On the complex, we have 4 buildings, a women's facility, a sex offender facility, men's short-term care, and maximum security, reserved for violent patients and murderers. 3 years ago, I decided to move. I found this great big house. The rent was cheap. It was really updated and had so much charm and character. But the neighborhood was kind of iffy. My husband, at the time we've since separated, would always sit and smoke out on the porch. For a few weeks I would randomly see or hear him talking to someone, a man. He looked kind of dirty, like he didn't change clothes much or had a dirty job. I just assumed he was a neighbor, didn't think anything of it. One evening I went outside to call my husband in for dinner, after putting our 1-year-old son down to sleep. And the man freaked out when he saw me.
"You! I know you! You remember me?"
No, I'm sorry. Who are you?
"Nah, you remember me. Nobody forget this face.
You worked at the name of institute. Yeah, I work there. Were you an employee or a resident?" At this point he gets angry, started screaming at me for not remembering his name, and goes into a full psychotic episode. He was rambling and screaming about the demons still talk to him. But as long as he drinks, they only whisper. How the squirrels are watching out for him for danger. They are his friends and don't want him to get into trouble because they don't want him to go back. And how he's never going back to the institute. Suddenly he starts yelling at the squirrels to be quiet, that he's talking. Then focused in on me. Talking about how I'm here to take him back, but he's never going back. Starts screaming more. I get my husband inside, try to de-escalate the situation, but he wasn't having it. He was convinced now that I was sent by the institute to bring him back. I locked my door and instantly called my co-worker for advice. He looked the guy up, and he had been a resident in max security but was non-violent for the majority of his stay. A week or two goes by, but no sign of him. But I find traces of him randomly, some paper with gibberish written on it, drawings, sticks arranged in a weird design on my porch. I would randomly get that being watched feeling when doing yard work, which being in my line of work is an intuition you can rely on, and would promptly go inside. It all finally came to a head when I saw a shadowy figure across the street, watching my house. I decided enough, and called the police, the institute to find his caseworker's phone number, and my supervisor. He was gone before the police came, but after some time his caseworker tracked him down and informed me that he had been spoken to, and to call again if he's seen. I've moved since then, but that man is still out there somewhere, probably still unmedicated and not receiving the proper help he needs, because let's be real, the government sucks at follow-up care for the extremely poor and homeless. He is a ticking time bomb, and the scariest thing for me is waiting to see his name on the new admit register, and waiting to see the reason for his return, knowing whatever it is could have been me. 20. This happened 6 years ago. At the time I was 17 years old, male. I live in the biggest city of Switzerland, probably the safest country in the world. But still this has happened. So it was a Saturday night, and a friend of mine turned 16 that day. He decided to celebrate his birthday in a well-known bar in the old town of said city. As you may not know, you're allowed to drink alcohol at age 16 in Switzerland. So we are having a great time that night, drinking and partying. My friend, whose birthday it was, got heavily drunk in no time because of all the drinks he was offered. So he decided to head home pretty early, around midnight if I remember properly. Me and two of my friends didn't want to call it a night yet, and went out for a smoke through the back door of the bar. After we finished, we realized we had drunkenly shut ourselves out, so we had to go all the way around the block to enter through the front door again. As we were making our way back to the entrance, more of a staggering than walking, we passed this old, shady-looking dude. In my drunken state, I even bumped into him with my shoulder, but carried on walking anyways. Shortly after, we hear him shouting, "Fucking foreigners, stop!" and some other things I can't really remember. We, quite puzzled by this sudden rage, just stood in the middle of the walkway, trying to rationalize his outburst. I mean, it was just a bump with the shoulder. I didn't even hit him hard, nor was it intended. As we were standing there, he started speed-walking in my direction. I assumed he's just gonna curse at me or whatsoever. I was very wrong. He started throwing fists at me. His punches didn't even hit me that hard, and he wasn't even aiming for my face. I took one hard punch to the backside of my ribs, though, and that's when one of my friends pushed him away. I collected myself, and we gathered in front of him. He was just standing in front of us, shouting that we have no respect for the elders and that he's gonna kill us all. This old man was nuts and probably on drugs. As he was frantically shouting at us, we realized there's a knife in his hand. We then booked it out of the situation and back to the bar in hyperspeed, adrenaline pumping through our veins. Because of that, my drunken state suddenly cleared up, and I started to feel a pulsating pain at the point he'd hit me. As I wanted to touch that spot, it felt wet. I took my hand out from under my shirt and saw blood. Adrenaline rushing again. I hesitated no second and took off my shirt in the middle of the bar. By the reaction of the people around me, I could tell something was wrong. They took me to the toilet where I could see it myself. I had a big wound on the back of my ribs. It was bleeding, but to my surprise not that heavily. Still, I was in a bit of panic and didn't know what to do. In fear of the police, we also smoked some weed, and I was afraid they could drug test me. I know, it's stupid. We decided to head for the train station and take the first train home. Half an hour train ride later, I arrived at my parents'. I woke them up, telling something happened and that I took a knife to the back. They were, understandably, up in no seconds. One thing my father said after he saw the wound, "A band-aid will do." My mother, on the other side, wasn't having any of this, and drove me directly to the hospital where they sounded the depth of my wound. They said I was very lucky. Little more to the right, and he would have punctured my lung. Me, probably drowning in my own blood. Police then came to the hospital as well, and I had to give them a statement. I told them everything I could remember. I even had to go to the police station again the next day, and to my surprise, they had a collage of mugshots prepared. I could identify this old bastard right away. Obviously, he was already registered, and they even told me he stabbed another guy in the same night. Shortly after, we met again in court. I can't remember what he was sentenced to. It doesn't matter anyway. Karma got him. After some time passed, 2 or 3 months or so, I received a letter explaining the death of my attacker while he was in prison. So yeah, thanks Karma for doing your thing. I won't ever meet this bastard again. 21. I lived the first 18 years of my life in a not very nice part of London, so I got smart very quickly. However, this guy almost slipped past me. When I was younger, I was bullied very badly, and as a result, I've had very few friends, so when a boy about 3 years older than me took an interest in hanging out with me and wanted to be my friend, I was flattered. He'd occasionally walk me home from school and pick my little brother up from school. Pretty soon rumors started that we were dating and or sleeping together, which both he and I vociferously denied. He said he wasn't a creep and that he couldn't see me like that because I was 11 and he was 14 or 15. Our friendship sort of became more distant after I moved schools in the middle of year 8 because of the bullying. But we'd still hang out every couple of weeks until he got a job at a local branch of a large UK supermarket. And I went to agricultural college, and as a result, worked stupid hours on a farm. Because of my hours in the winter, I'd often leave home in the dark, and get back in the dark. To top it off, I had to walk through a park to get to the train station. Out of the blue, on my way back one evening, I bumped into him in the park, and we got chatting. And I foolishly gave away the fact that I had to walk through the park a lot. I never saw him again. I went away to university and made friends, but thought it was odd he hadn't been in contact for so long. About 6 months after I started university, some people I went to school with reached out to me on Facebook and asked if I was aware that my old friend had been arrested and tried at the Old Bailey and was convicted of 1 rape and 2 sexual assaults. I refused to believe it, until I got in contact with the police, and the arresting officer recognized me from the evidence gathered from my now ex-friend. When he was arrested, he was found with a picture of me with unimaginable fluids on it. When questioned about the picture, he said that I was the one he always wanted, but couldn't bring himself to do anything to me when I was younger because he saw me as innocent. However, the time he met me in the park on my way home from the farm, he was going to do something. But as he got closer, he realized that I was wearing steel-toed boots, and I'd beefed up a fair bit because of the physical work I was doing. So he didn't want to take his chances and played it cool instead. A really scary thought is that he could be roaming the streets fairly soon, with a new identity, and no one would have a clue. Part of me is still angry with myself for not seeing him for the monster he is. 22. About 6 years ago, when I was living with my boyfriend at the time, in a very small backwoods town in West Virginia. It was 23 miles from the interstate to my house, and there was only one house close enough to be seen from our house. The majority of traffic through our road was actually trucks carrying fracking wastewater. Yuck, I know. And it was extremely rare to see people out walking around in this area. Like I had never seen it before. So it was a peaceful place, but it could be pretty creepy, all on its own. We lived in a single wide trailer next to my boyfriend's boss, his wife and 3 kids, the neighbor I mentioned previously. We were pretty close with them, and they were actually the reason we moved out to the area. We had spent a substantial amount of time out there before we moved out, and had never really had any unsettling experiences. However, it did not take long for that to change. We moved into our house as soon as the previous tenants moved out. My boyfriend's boss said they were into partying, they constantly had people over, etc. We had been living in a total shithole of a studio apartment, so we were really eager to start our new lives in a legitimate house. The first night we stayed there, I could have swore I heard someone rummaging around on our back porch. There were a few things still out there from the previous tenants, but I wrote it off as my mind playing tricks on me in this remote new location. However, strange noises continued to occur almost every single night. Rustling behind the house, thumps and thuds on the front porch, mostly things that could definitely be animals and not people. My boyfriend never seemed to hear them, or just chose to actively ignore them, and he reaffirmed my original conclusion that it was all in my head. About a month after we moved in, I woke up to the sound of frantic pounding on my back door. The back door was just outside the door to our bedroom, so it was pretty loud. I laid there half convinced I was dreaming, for at least a full minute while the pounding continued. At that point, I realized, nope, I am completely awake. What the actual fuck is going on? I shook and shook my boyfriend, but he was an extremely deep sleeper. So he just kind of made some noises and rolled over. I tried to tell him there's someone on our back porch, but it was like he couldn't even hear it. This continued for probably about 5 minutes before it quit abruptly. I was mortified at this point, physically shaking, and I had been too scared to get up and go look myself. After about 10 minutes, I was convinced that whoever, whatever was out there, must be gone. Hopefully. So I got up to look out the back window. Nothing. Front window? Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. I was wide awake and figured I would be up for the rest of the night. But being so far from everything, with no internet, cable, or phone service, I got bored quickly and climbed back into bed, and eventually drifted off. I told my boyfriend about it in the morning, and he agreed that it was pretty creepy, and that we should maybe get a camera or something in case it ever happens again. We both went about our days and went over to the neighbor's house to visit with the kids and have dinner. Before I even mentioned it to her, the wife of the family started telling me that her daughter had made her so mad the night before by suddenly remembering at midnight that she had a project due for school the next day that she had not started on, nor did she have the materials for. Fuming, she got herself dressed again and went to head out to Walmart to get some supplies to bail her daughter out of failing this project. As she started to get in her car, she saw someone walking along the road out past her house. As she was already pissed off and generally has no filter anyway, she hollered out, "Can I help you with something?" And when he turned around to look at her, she said her heart sunk. She said he may have been some kind of tweaker or strung out on drugs or something, but his face was pale and his eyes were sunken in, and his appearance was disheveled and generally alarming. He looked back at her for a moment, then turned around and continued walking without a word. She got in her car to head out the road to Walmart, thinking she'd pass him and get a better look at him on the way. As she rounded the bend just past our houses, she realized that he was gone. There is literally nothing between our houses and the next houses except woods for at least a mile, meaning he almost certainly disappeared into the woods, while we never saw him again or had any further disturbances for the rest of our residency there. I could not shake the feeling that he must be watching us. I can still hear the pounding like it was yesterday. Was this guy living in the woods? Was he looking for someone who used to live there that did drugs with him? Did he need help? We will never know. And to the man who gave me the longest lingering feeling of unease in history, let's not meet, okay? 23. Now I'd like to start by addressing the elephant in the room. I'm a 19-year-old girl, fully capable of making decisions on her own, and this particular event was my fault entirely. This will be important down the line, you'll understand soon enough. My parents have always been strict, mainly because of my father's shady connections, and them not wanting their only daughter to get into trouble. So it doesn't really come off as a surprise when I tell people my first ever actual road trip happened on my 19th birthday. Me and a few friends of mine drove down to Arizona and spent a few nights camping. We're from Oklahoma. We met another group there, and we all decided it'd be for the best if we stick together and do what our generation does these days. Because we didn't have much time, both groups decided it's for the best if each and every one of us shares something they wouldn't otherwise, and, after one too many drinks, it was finally my turn. Despite being reluctant at first, peer pressure did its thing and I opened up about, possibly, my only fetish: blowing a guy through a glory hole. Million jokes later, a girl, which I'll call Marie from the other group, told me that if I was interested in actually living out my fantasy, I should go to a certain pub in Dallas. I can't share the name of it for obvious reasons. And seeing as I'm from Oklahoma, she thought it'd be in my best interest to know about it. Fast forward a few days later. Here I am heading back at my place, thinking about taking a short trip to Dallas. I think to myself, Anne, you're 19. You had your first road trip. Just go for it. And go for it I did. I packed a small backpack for a few days, bought a bus ticket, and I was on my way to Dallas, to a certain pub, at which, according to Marie, I'll live out at least one of my fantasies. I won't lie, I had butterflies in my stomach from the moment I took the first step outside of my place, all the way to the actual pub at which I was supposed to go. The bar looked, well, old to say the least. It wasn't the best looking place, nor the cleanest to be frank, but that was the last thing in my mind. Not surprising at all, most of these people inside were men around their 30s, with an alarmingly low number of women, not counting the 2 waitresses working the tables. That was the first red flag, but as I said before, I wasn't really paying much attention back then, now that I think about it. I sat by the bar, had a chat with the bartender, who was a really nice person, and after 2 drinks, I decided to take a leap of faith and actually do it. I'm not going to pretend or lie. I was looking forward to it, and was quite excited about the whole thing. As instructed by Marie beforehand, who kept in contact with me, I entered not the ladies' room nor the men's restroom, but the room in between the 2. Thinking back to this, thank God I locked the door as soon as I entered. It was small and it had one stall facing the men's restroom, which made me chuckle because I had no idea what to expect. And next to the stall there was a small sink, which I imagine is pretty self-explanatory as well. I skipped to the stall, opened it, and waited very nervously. A few minutes passed before I heard the men's restroom door open. The man, almost as if he knew without even me doing anything, stepped inside the stall facing mine and stood in front of the hole, literally doing nothing. I wanted to get closer and look, but something was off. It felt very wrong. All I could see from a slight distance were the back of his pants and his hands as they rested in his hoodie. It was then that I noticed his huge hunting knife sticking out from his hoodie's front pocket. In panic, I let out a gasp of fear and backed away, hitting my head hard on the doorknob behind me, which honestly made me dizzy. It was then that I found out the hard way that some places aren't meant to be visited. He leaned forward, his dark brown eyes and dirty face looking down at me through the glory hole. He didn't say a single word, and honestly, he didn't have to, because as soon as he grinned, I heard someone trying to open the door to the room that I was in a very harsh fashion. I quickly stood up and tried to think of a way to get myself out of this situation. There were no windows and there was only one way out. To put the icing on the cake, I had forgotten the phone back at the motel I was staying in. Thinking on my feet, I pretended to call for the cops and spoke as loudly as I could while speaking out to an imaginary object, praying to God they fall for it. Fall for it they did, but not before leaving me a message. As soon as I entered the stall a second time, to lock myself out even further, in case they did break in, I saw the knife sticking out of the hole as the man continued to laugh like some sort of a maniac before finally leaving. I waited for a few minutes before storming out and catching a cab to my motel. I ended up packing and catching a bus back to Oklahoma the same hour, not wanting to spend another minute there. What weirds me out the most is the fact that as soon as I tried contacting Marie again on Facebook, she blocked me instantly, and my friends couldn't find her Facebook page either. So here I am, a few days later, still thinking about what could possibly happen to me had I not locked the door as soon as I entered. Now, I don't blame Marie nor anyone else for this, because no one forced me to try something like this out. I was just lucky enough to get through it and find a way out to tell the tale. Marie and the creepy guys at the Glory Hole bar, let's not ever meet again. 24. On a rainy night in the era before cell phones, I was 18, walking a very long way home from work, and I foolishly accepted a ride home from a strange man. Small-town girl living in her lonely world, and I had just gotten off a double shift. He was elderly, acted genuinely concerned for me, and I saw a Bible in the back seat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken, and he had to get out to open the door for me. It took him a while as he had trouble walking with a bum leg. He told me the passenger door didn't open from the inside. Immediately I felt weird, but years of nice girl training told me, he's gone to so much trouble, don't say no. We chatted for a while and he politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and told me I looked like his late wife, and that her spirit must have led him to help me get home. It sounded very sweet the way he told it. The conversation turned to if I was still in school, what my hobbies were like, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period. Which was rude, but he acted like it was going to be the punchline of a joke, so I laughingly asked him why he would want to know. He said very calmly, "Because if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away." Oh shit. He said that God had kept him lonely for years, but now, because I looked so much like his late wife, it was clear I was meant to be his, so he could start life over again, and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to. He grabbed my hand and kissed it and said, "I can't wait to show you to our new bed." I told him I forgot something at work. He told me I could get it tomorrow. I told him I needed to pee, and he said I could hold it until we got home. He wasn't going to let me out. He kept talking about how things were different back then, and how men are the head of the household, that women are to follow their fathers and then their husbands, and God says this and God says that. He talked about his wedding day, how his wife's father had given her to him. So I blurted out, "You're going to get my father's permission to marry me before taking me to your home, right? God would want that, right? You need to do that because otherwise we would be living in sin and the marriage bed is not holy." Which I remembered from many days of church sermons. He got offended then, and said he knew the Bible better than I did, and of course he knew to ask my father for permission. I told him that we couldn't live together in sin, and we should go to my house before going home, and I reminded him that the street wasn't far. Still trying to keep the conversation light and joking, I told him that's what a godly man would do, and he wholeheartedly agreed. Then we got to the street where I had previously told him I lived. He asked which house was my parents'. I gave him a fake house number, far away from mine, and had him drop me there. He wanted to come inside. I told him I needed to let my parents know about God sending me a husband before he could meet them. I said it would take a few days, come back tomorrow. He said, "I'll give you a few minutes, but then we need to be on our way." I told him to drive around the block so I could have time to pack my clothes. He nodded and finally opened the car door. I ran to that house's door, waved to him until he drove away, then sprinted to my house, where I lived alone. Double-bolted my door and put the couch in front of it that night. Never saw him again. I did not call the police, though I wish I had. I moved in with my boyfriend a few days later, and I insisted on waiting at work until he could pick me up every night. 25. My freshman year in college, fall 2014. I went on a school-sponsored whitewater rafting trip with my roommate and a close friend. It was a terrible day. It poured and was freezing. Each raft had 6 people, so it was my group of 3 and 3 other individuals. One girl was up front with me. My 2 friends were unhelpful in the middle, not paddling, and there were 2 guys in the back. One of them was an asshole, and the other was quiet. Needless to say, it was an awful experience. As soon as we were off the river, my group split from the 3 strangers, and I didn't really expect to see any of them again. The campus is large, and we didn't exchange any contact info. After a long, wet bus ride home, my 3 went to our dorms, took long showers, and agreed to meet up at the dining hall to get some food. Our dining hall has one large outer wall, made up entirely of windows. I settled with my friends on a couch near one of the windows, and we were eating our food when I noticed the quieter guy walk by. We waved at him and gestured for him to come into the hall and join us. We were freshmen and eager to make new friends, and he seemed nice. He came over shortly after, and we chatted and then exchanged phone numbers. He took a particular liking to me. There was a running joke between my friends about how I seemed to attract all the guys. Ironically, I'm the only girl in the group who isn't attracted to guys. So he and I started hanging out. He would come over and hang out in my room, and usually we would just sit and chat with my roommate. We got food a few times and just chilled. I tried not to give off the wrong vibe. I really considered getting some type of shirt proclaiming my gayness. But anyway, one day I was lying on my bed and he decides that he wants to lay next to me. My roommate is in the shower and I was slightly uncomfortable, but he didn't try anything, and I knew she was close by. She eyeballed us after she got out, and questioned me about it later. We laughed it off afterwards, just figuring he was a quirky guy. After a couple weeks, he got more aggressive. He would text me asking me to hang out, and wouldn't take no for an answer. I would tell him I could hang out after studying, but he would show up at my door. The fact that we lived in the same building made this convenient for him. On one specific day, he ignored the fact that I said no to hanging out, and showed up, knocking on my door like typical. I opened it and gave him an attitude, irritated. I told him off, but he didn't seem fazed. In fact, he was approaching me closer and closer, trying to come in. He insisted he would just hang out until I was done. At this point, I'm really uncomfortable. I'm small, only 5'2", and petite in general. He definitely had at least 60 pounds on me, and was at least 8 inches taller. I put on my most serious face, and told him to go. He looked irritated, but I closed the door. Walking back into my room, my roommate looks at me, and questions if he just tried to force himself in, and I nodded. She was concerned, and I was freaked out. Later that night, he started taking my name door tags off of my door, and put them on his. It creeped me out, and when I went and retrieved them, he treated it like a game though, and continued to take them back until I placed them inside my room. A few days later, he started coming by again and wanted to come in. After opening the door once to tell him to go away, I refused to open it again. I texted one of my male friends who lived on a different floor to come hang out with me because I felt nervous. He assured me he would be right up, and he was in my room 5 minutes later. The next time the kid knocked, my guy friend pulled the door open and with a look asked him, "Can I help you?" The kid never knocked on my door again. He did occasionally text me or Snapchat me, but I ignored him. I haven't seen him since last semester though. I'm so okay with it. Kid, let's not meet up again. 26. I am an exterminator. For another 2 days anyway. New job. Woo me. And one of the crappy things about this job is where to go to the bathroom. We're instructed not to ask customers, no matter the urgency, to use their bathrooms. So that leaves the techs to find bathrooms in their area they can use. Parks, porta potties, stores, or one unfortunate time a bucket in the back of my truck. So today started normally, had a few stops in my normal area and felt the urge. Thinking quickly, I remembered a park a few miles from where I was that had an outhouse building. Like a snack shack at little kids' baseball games and whatnot, but with bathrooms around the back. So I go to the park and of course, most sports are over for the season, so the bathrooms are locked. Damn. I call a co-worker and ask if he's familiar with my area to help me find another restroom. He told me about a park that no one really goes to anymore, kind of abandoned because it was built next to a creek that overflows all the time. And the bathrooms are gross, but they are usually open year-round. Awesome. I didn't care about cleanliness, I just had to poop. I popped the roughly estimated address into my GPS and head that way. Apparently, I have driven by this place 100 times but never noticed it. I pull in. There aren't any other cars, so I make my way to the outhouse building. I grab my phone so I can read Reddit, of course, and make my way in. My co-worker was right. It looks like they haven't been cleaned in a few years, and there is graffiti and mildew all over the walls inside. Whatever, I need to go. I head into the cleanest stall I can find, still nasty, and proceed to mound up toilet paper. I keep a supply in my truck because of previous situations, all over the seat to make a cover. So I'm sitting there doing my business, reading no sleep as usual, and I hear the exterior door open. I should mention that this park had a gravel parking lot and driveway, and it was overgrown a bit and covered with fallen sticks. So I would have definitely heard a vehicle pull in. So I hear the door open, and kind of make a clearing my throat noise, letting someone know that I was in there. And the door closes. I don't hear anything for a moment, so I go back to reading, thinking that someone came in, saw how gross it was, and didn't have to go as bad as I did, and left. After about a minute I hear footsteps. Creepy, but whatever, I try to ignore it. I was in the last stall, furthest from the door, in a line of 3 stalls. The footsteps grew closer. Still trying to keep calm, I figured that this dude had to poop like me, so I don't care. Then the footsteps sped up to a quick run, and stopped directly in front of the stall I was in, and turned towards the door. All I could see were ratty-looking tennis sneakers. There was a push against the door and I said, "Occupied." They stood there. Then there was a more forceful push against the door. "I'm sorry, this one's occupied." They still stood there in silence. Then the door started violently shaking, as if this person was hell-bent on getting in. I yelled out a final time, "Occupied!" and it stopped. The person then slowly turned and walked to the door, and before shutting it again, laughed, and turned out the already dim, flickering lights. I finished up and ran out, looking all around and found no one. I checked my work truck, which was all locked up, and found nothing was wrong. I don't know who or what the hell that was, but it definitely creeped me the heck out. 27. This incident occurred during the summer. I live in a suburb about 25 minutes outside of Baltimore, Maryland. I live in a park that's about a mile walk from my house. My dog and I walk to the park and back almost every day. She is a year-old mutt. Mix of pit bull, blue tick hound, and German shepherd. She has a lot of energy, so these walks do us some good. She's around 50 pounds. We always go to the water fountain to get a drink before we go home. As we were getting a drink, I felt like someone is watching me. Let me state that I am a girl that wears earbuds when walking my dog. Yes, I know it's dumb. I turn around and there is this tall man about 60 years old looking at me. He also has a large greyhound standing next to him. He waves to me and starts talking to me. I take out my earbuds and he started making small talk with me, asking questions like, "What is your dog's name? How old is she?" Then he starts asking me questions about myself. That's when my red flag went up. He started asking me if I was married, how old I was, and many other personal questions. As he is asking me these questions, my dog starts whining and pulling on her leash. She is a well-behaved dog, so this put a red flag up for me. The guy saw that my dog was doing this, and he said, "Can I give your dog a treat? I have some in my pocket." As we were standing, I never saw him give his dog any treats. I told him that she had a sensitive stomach, and that it would not be a good idea. I was not going to allow this man to give my dog a treat. I should also state that this park has a a large walking path that goes through the woods. If you walk the full path, it's about 2 miles. The man then stated that he was about to walk the path. He turned and said to me, "Would you like to take a walk in the woods with me?" When he said that, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told him, "No, thank you," and that I was just leaving. We said our goodbyes, and I watched him walk down the path into the woods with his dog. As soon as he was out of my eyesight, I ran as fast as I could with my dog out the park. Once I hit the park entrance, I started to walk down the hill. The hill leads to a road that goes through a little community that I walked to get home. It took me about 4 minutes from the park to the street that I crossed to get to my house. Again, I had that feeling that someone was watching me. I turned around and the creepy guy from the park was behind me in his car. I stood there frozen in fear because I knew he could not have walked that entire path in 4 minutes. He drove by me with a sinister smile and waving. As he drove by, I looked in his car and saw that he had no dog in it. He rolled his window down and said, "I hope I see you again." And he drove off. I immediately ran home as fast as I could, with Zoe at my side. So, creepy dog walker guy, let's not meet. 28. This happened 3 years ago, when I had just moved to San Francisco for college. I was 21 years old at the time, and had just moved to the Bay Area, from a very safe and very small town, 5,000 people in Europe. It was pretty late, maybe about 1 a.m. I guess, and I was coming back from a house party in San Francisco. At the time, I was living a little outside the city, close to the airport. So I figured I would take the train to the airport, and then catch a cab home from there, so I wouldn't have to spend too much money. I was all by myself, and was wearing a dress and heels, and I was even still a little tipsy from the party. I took Bart to the airport, and when I got off, I got a little lost inside the airport and I couldn't find the exit. What I did find was one of those little airport trains, air trains. And I thought maybe if I got on that, it would take me to the main exit, entrance. I got on the little train, it started moving and I immediately regretted getting on. The train was completely empty except for me and a bald man who was probably in his mid to late 30s. The man started talking to me, asking what I was doing there, was I a student, where was I from, do I have a boyfriend, asking me for my phone number. I was a little nervous, because I wasn't used to older men randomly starting up conversations with me. But I stayed friendly and answered his questions. I even gave him my phone number, figuring I could just ignore him if he ever called me. I felt pretty uncomfortable though. The train eventually stopped, and when we got off I realized that taking the air train had been a big mistake. It had dropped us off somewhere outside, on the other end of the airport, and there was nothing around us but darkness. No people, no lights, only buildings, and nothing else. I started walking towards the main entrance, but it was pretty far away. I was walking fast, but the man caught up with me. We were literally the only people there, walking along in the dark. I was pretty creeped out by then. He starts telling me that I should not be out by myself and that it's dangerous. And then he pulls out a huge knife. My heart started racing and I couldn't believe this was happening. He shows me the knife and tells me that it's so dangerous out here and that he has it to protect himself. I don't even remember how I reacted. I think I nodded and said, "Ah, okay," and then just started walking a little faster. How the F did he think I was going to react? We're all alone in the dark and he pulls out a knife on me? My heart racing, I finally reached the main entrance of the airport and got a cab right away without another word to the man. Thank God nothing happened, but I was honestly very, very scared. Thinking back still gives me the creeps. When I laid in bed that night, still very much creeped out, my phone vibrated. He had sent me a dick pic. 29. What's a stylus, you may ask? Well, it's a small pen that's in the Nintendo DS systems to use on the touchscreen. When I was 13 years old, I decided to be a cool dude and buy a white stylus to pair with my black DS. Since all black DS systems came with black styluses, I figured myself pretty genius to have a cool mismatch. Not only that, I strongly believed this stylus gave me good luck in my video games. Sure, you might be rolling your eyes at me, but I legitimately did find myself winning more often with it. But I digress. One day it's lunchtime at school, and I'm outside playing a multiplayer DS game with a friend, as we usually like to do on nice afternoons. Teachers like to get on our cases about playing video games in the lunchroom or library. So we went to a section of outdoor picnic benches, not too far away from school grounds, to avoid disturbance. It was located right by a convenience store as well, which I definitely like to frequent on occasion. On this lunch break, my friend decided to go inside to buy some chips and drink. I decided to stay outside and prepare for the next multiplayer match. Not even a few minutes later, a man walks out of the store and in my general direction. He must have noticed my DS and asked me from afar what I was playing. As I replied, he advanced towards me to look at my game. As he did, I decided to describe my recent accomplishments and setup. I even pulled out my lucky stylus to show him, explaining how it helped me win many a battle. He then explained how his house was just down the road, and wanted to show me all his video games collection. While it sounded very cool to meet an adult with the same interests as me, lunchtime was about to end and I didn't want to be late. He promised me it would only take a few minutes if we went down a nearby alley, and being the naive teenager I was, I agreed. We weren't even a few minutes down when I realized I had left my lucky stylus on the bench. When I was showing the man, I must have placed it on the bench instead of back inside my DS. That was a really bad habit of mine, and it was a miracle I hadn't lost it up to this point. Before the man had the chance to react, I was running back to the bench to get it. As I got there, my friend was out of the store and trying to find me. As I put my stylus back into my DS, he asked where I had gone, and I told him how a man came by and offered to show me his video game collection, and that he lived just down the alley. It was that moment my friend told me there were no houses down that alley. It just led to a trail that went deep into the woods. I didn't really let it sink in that moment how much danger I could have been in. I didn't even become suspicious when I saw that the man had disappeared when I looked back down the alley. But looking back, I was very fortunate to have left my stylus. No one would have known where I had gone to, or who I was with. So it's for that reason I still believe my stylus is lucky to this day. Edit. I guess I should mention I never did see that man again, but there was an incident of kidnapping in that residential area a few months later. The kid was found, but the kidnapper wasn't. It's anybody's guess if it was the same man I saw or not. 30. Please be aware the following story contains themes of sexual assault. I was always a theatre geek, so freshman year of high school I was in the school play, Reviving Ophelia, which was actually about an abusive relationship. Oh, the irony. John didn't do theatre, but I met him through mutual theatre friends. The group of us would hang out while waiting for our rides after rehearsal, and soon, John was somehow always there to hang out with us. He always said he had either stayed after for a club meeting, or got stuck in detention for skipping class. John was also in some of my classes, and would text me or Facebook message me after school, so we got to know each other really well. One day, one of our mutual theatre friends, Sarah, and I were talking, and she mentioned how John was basically in love with me. I laughed it off like, yeah, okay, whatever. And she started poking me and playfully saying, "He calls you Bella to his Edward. Twilight was at the height of its popularity back then. I'm pretty sure he only gets detention to stay after and see you. This was all pretty light teasing, but John was a bit of a troublemaker. The class clown who always got kicked out of class, and I was the goody two-shoes. I liked talking to John, but I didn't want that much attention from him. So being the immature freshman that I was, didn't see how to handle the situation any other way than cutting him off completely. I sometimes regret this choice, thinking that if I had talked to him and let him down easy, the next few years wouldn't have been a living nightmare, but honestly, I don't think that would have made a difference. John messaged me relentlessly, asking what happened, why I wouldn't talk to him. Again, I was immature and didn't know how to handle it, so I just didn't respond. He would still show up to our after-rehearsal hangouts, but I started doing homework while waiting for my ride as an excuse not to talk to anyone. John moved his seat to sit behind me in every one of our classes together. When the teachers asked him what he was doing, he would say he forgot his glasses at home and had to sit closer to the board. He would whisper behind me, "Still not going to talk to me, Nicky? Nicky's a mute now." If I answered a question in class, I got, "Oh, so you can talk." He'd lean forward and blow in my hair, or whack it with his pencil, anything to try to get a rise out of me. If the teachers noticed, they told him to knock it off, but like I said, John was trouble and even the teachers got tired of arguing with him after a while. His dramatic, "Who, me?" would never fail to get a laugh out of the class though. At the end of the school shows, the same kid would always throw a cast party. His parents gave him the house for the weekend, and his older brother supplied the alcohol. After hours of begging my parents to let me stay over at the party, they didn't like the idea of a co-ed sleepover. They finally let me go. Being a freshman, and this my first night of drinking, I went overboard and ended up passing out in a random bedroom. John had been at the party, but we mostly stayed to opposite sides of the house. That is, until I woke up with him on top of me. My pants were pulled down, and he was holding my hand, shoving it down his pants. I tried to pull my hand back, but he held it firmly inside his pants. When I tried to shove him off, he whispered, "Be quiet, there are other people asleep in the room. Just relax." I told him if he didn't let go, I was going to scream, and he let go of my hand and I shoved him off, running out of the room. I found my friend Sarah asleep on the couch downstairs, and laid on the floor in front of the couch, now wide awake. I started to hear my name tauntingly being whispered as footsteps descended down the stairs. The stairs faced the back of the couch, so as long as he didn't come around, he wouldn't see me. I pulled myself close to the couch and prayed he would just leave. After pausing for a few moments, he eventually did. Waiting for my parents to pick me up in the morning, watching him skip around laughing with everyone like nothing happened, was torturous. Things got worse from there. He started messaging me relentlessly again, saying we needed to talk. When that didn't work, he started leaving letters in my locker. At first they were angry, telling me I made him do what he did. He was only reacting to my actions because I ignored him. I was pulling away and I made him do it. Then they were pleading that he loved me. He just wanted to talk to me. He couldn't forget about me. I didn't tell my parents about any of this. They were helicopter parents who had just given me a bit of freedom I desperately wanted. And I didn't want to prove them right, telling them what happened. I didn't tell my theatre friends because they liked John, and they were, for the most part, my only friends. They thought John and I had just got into an argument, and we weren't talking to each other. John still came to our hangouts. He would always find a way to touch me, sitting next to me, our knees touching, leaning over me to talk to someone else. His letters started acting like everything was okay. He would refer to conversations I had with the group, like they had been conversations between him and I. John was very popular, and I was about to find out, had lots of loyal little followers. High school mob mentality, gotta love it. People I didn't know started coming up to me in the hallways asking why I was being a bitch and not talking to John. He'd use other people's phones to call me. When I picked up and heard it was him, I would immediately hang up. Sometimes I think he would send out these randos to see if I was telling anyone what happened. He even got teachers hooked into it. One teacher pulled me aside after class and told me John had come to her very upset, and she thought it was a good idea if John and I sat down together and had a talk. I declined, saying I didn't think that would be a good idea. After pestering a couple more times saying John was really upset, she finally let it go. The letters and rumors started saying John was going to kill himself if I didn't talk to him. If we had any classes together in the following years, the very first day he would make sure to stay after with the teacher to talk about our problematic relationship, and how he was very hurt by me, and couldn't be placed into groups with me. He still sat behind me every chance he got. When musical season came around, I did stage crew. I can act, but sounded like a dying cat whenever I tried to sing and have 2 left feet. And guess who else joined? You guessed it. John. Stage crew was on the weekends. We built the sets, some students made costumes, and I was the prop master. And it was relatively unsupervised. I could tell you many stories about John during stage crew, but honestly, it would be way too long, so I'll tell you one. He got the other stage crew boys to start calling me Tight Pants, as I wore a pair of tight sweatpants to crew one day. Threw them out that very night. The props were in the school attic. You needed to go up to the 3rd floor and walk down 2 long hallways to get to it. And the lights were usually off as it was the weekend. Each hallway has a set of locked doors at the end, so I would have to get the keys from the tool closet. Walk to the end of the hallway, unlock the door, walk down another hallway and unlock the door to the attic. I walked down the first hallway pretty quickly, as dark, empty school hallways are always rather creepy, and was fiddling with the lock, feeling like I was being watched. Right as I unlocked the door, I felt an arm snake around my waist, picking me up, and a hand wrapped against my mouth. I started squirming and screaming and nailed him with my elbow and was let go. John keeled over, clutching his stomach, and another crew kid was bent over laughing hysterically. They had been hiding behind where the lockers ended and the door started, waiting for me, knowing I would have to walk down there to get to the attic. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I yelled, trying to rein in the tears. The last thing I wanted was John to see me cry. "Come on, Nicky, it was just a joke. We just wanted to scare you," crew guy said, still laughing. "Yeah, Nicky, don't be such a tight pants," John said, laughing now too. I stormed off without another word into the attic, locking the door behind me. I was crying all the while, hearing shouts down the hallway. "It was just a joke, Nicky, we're sorry," followed by more laughter. After that, rumors started circulating that I gave John a blowjob at the cast party, that we had sex in the tool closet during stage crew, etc., etc. Sarah, the theatre friend who I didn't talk to much anymore, came up to me at school one day and told me that John was saying some pretty fucked up things with the theatre boys, some of which also did stage crew. He would relay them in detail what he did to me, saying things like she had the tightest pussy. At this point, Sarah was so uncomfortable, she stopped hanging around them as much, and felt the need to tell me. Now I had randos coming up to me, not only calling me a bitch, but a whore, and I had had enough. I wrote a letter to John telling him I didn't want to hear my name ever come out of his mouth, and wrote down all the things I heard he was telling people, and that I would report him if he didn't stop. Finally, things got better. No more letters from him. Only an occasional person would call me a bitch in the hallways. It was all good until one day I was walking to my parked car in the pouring rain. My school sucked and didn't have any parking for students, so you had to walk to the nearest shopping plaza where everyone parked their cars. And Johnny drives by in the opposite direction. I noticed him staring, but he was driving in the opposite direction, so I wasn't too worried. Until a minute or so later, I saw him pulling into the plaza as I was walking into it. He rolls down his window and asks if I want a ride to my car, which my car was literally one parking lot away, which he knew that was designated student parking. And I was already sopping wet, so offering to drive me there was pointless. I said no thanks and kept walking, and he kept driving slowly next to me. When we get to the actual spot, I sprint to my car and jump in. I think he's gone, but when I go to reverse, he had his car right behind me, sandwiching me in. He motions at me to roll down my window, and I do. Trying to just get him to go away, he yells out his window, "I love seeing you wet." And I flip him off, laying on my horn to attract attention. He laughs, rolls back up his window, and speeds away. The only other time I heard from him in high school was when he asked if I had shown someone his letters, which I had showed one or two to my boyfriend at the time, but that's a whole different story. And after the prom, when he left me a drunk voicemail saying I was a beautiful woman and he still loved me. There are more stories, one of which happened while I was babysitting during college, and walked by his house while he was home. But this post is already really long, and I think you get the sense that John made high school hell for me. So John, no, I am not your Bella. Edward was a stalker too, and let's please not meet again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 30 True Scary Stories number 4. You know, it's a really nice feeling whenever I finish the recording for one of these really long videos, because I know that the most difficult part is now behind me. Now what comes next is I'll spend all of my Sunday, this is a Saturday as I record this, I'll spend my Sunday editing, finding images, editing those, and putting everything together with music and all that, and any other tweaks that need to be made there. So it's a nice feeling to know that that part's done, the hard part's done. I actually had to swap a couple of stories out there. I'd recorded stories 3 and 4, and they were okay, and I'll probably still use the other ones in another video at some point, but just, I don't think that they weren't quite right for this video. So I got some freshly acquired stories, and I think you'll agree those two stories fit in quite nicely. This will be the last super long video until I think it'll be the end of January is the next one. Let me think. Yeah, there's no more special events or anything planned, so the end of January will be the next one. Of course, I will say, as I like to say, if you made it through in one sitting, then that is a very Herculean effort, and well done indeed. Your dedication is much appreciated. If you did enjoy the video and you know anyone else you think you might appreciate it, friends, family, random people you meet on the street, if you could just share it around, you know, tweet it, Facebook it, whatever, because that is all very much appreciated, and I'm always super duper grateful whenever I see that people are sharing the videos with others. I would of course like to take a moment to say thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And if I can also remind you guys, if you'd like to make sure that you're definitely getting notifications for the video, then just click on that little bell next to the subscriber button. Just click on that, and it should make you sure you get all the notifications for this channel, so that's like one a day, really. And if you want to make sure as a backup, you can of course follow me on Twitter, and all my new videos are automatically tweeted there, so they'll show up in your Twitter feed. The reason I mention this is because there's been some issues lately with YouTube. Well, it's actually a long-standing issue. I'm sure I've talked about this before. But people are not being notified when videos go up. And more worryingly, I mean that's bad, but more worryingly, the issue, and again another long-standing issue, of people being unsubscribed from channels they haven't chosen to unsubscribe from. I had at least one subscriber in the past week, obviously a dedicated subscriber, who checked the channel looking for new videos because he hadn't seen I'd uploaded for a while, and had discovered he'd been unsubscribed. I even had another subscriber, in relation to the lack of notifications, didn't know I uploaded every day, simply because he wasn't getting those notifications. So it's a little bit of a glitch, a little bit of a bug. These kind of things have always been there, they've just never been that bad before. So hopefully if you click on that little bell icon, that should hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, make sure you get the notifications. Right, and with that, I'm gonna go get a few hours rest, grab a bite to eat before I begin, well, before I go to sleep, and then tomorrow begin the work of putting this beast you've just watched together. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.